Stone McRae lay motionless on the snow-covered ridge, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid Montana air. The Spencer rifle felt like an extension of his arm, familiar and deadly. Below, 3 men moved through the moonlit valley, leading horses laden with what Stone recognized as stolen cattle. They had killed old Jeb Williams 2 days ago, left the shepherd's body for the wolves. Now justice would come silent and swift. Through his scope, Stone watched the leader gesture toward a clearing. The man's face was visible in the moonlight, scarred across one cheek, a feature Stone would remember. He controlled his breathing just as he had done hundreds of times during the war. Inhale, hold, squeeze. The first shot dropped the scarred man without a sound. The second caught his companion as he turned, confusion barely registering before death claimed him. The third man scrambled for his horse, panic evident in his jerky movements. Stone let him go. Sometimes it was better to leave one alive, to spread the word. "That's how it's done in Wildwood Valley," Stone muttered to himself, gathering his rifle and sliding down from his position. The surviving rustler would tell others about the shadow in the hills who never missed. The boogeyman who protected these lands when the law couldn't or wouldn't. The bitter cold bit through his layers as he made his way back to his horse. At 45, Stone felt every mile he'd traveled in his bones. 15 years since Appomattox, since he'd hung up his uniform and tried to forget the things he'd done as a Union scout and sharpshooter. Some nights he still woke sweating, hearing the screams of men he'd watched fall through his scope. Men who never saw death coming. His horse nickered softly as Stone approached. "Easy, Merlin," he murmured, stroking the gelding's neck. "Let's go home." Home was a sturdy cabin nestled against the mountains, built by Stone's own hands over 3 seasons. Every board cut, shaped, and fitted by himself. No neighbors for 10 miles in any direction, just how he preferred it. The isolation suited a man who'd seen too much of humanity at its worst. The cabin came into view as Stone rounded the final bend in the trail. Smoke curled from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before leaving. Inside, a single large room contained his life, a bed in one corner, a table and chair he'd crafted himself, shelves lined with books that connected him to the world he'd left behind. The walls held his rifles and the tools of survival. A door led to a small second room where he worked wood during the long winter months. Stone stabled Merlin and entered the cabin, the warmth enveloping him like an embrace. He hung his coat and hat, placed his rifle in its rack, then stoked the fire. As flames leapt higher, he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and settled into his chair. Beside him sat a half-finished table leg, the wood smooth under his fingers. This was his peace, working with his hands, creating instead of destroying. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same fingers that pulled triggers now shaped beauty from raw timber. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Few people ventured this far up the mountain, especially after dark. Stone retrieved his Colt revolver before opening the door. "Put that away before you shoot your only friend," said Tom Pike, his breath visible in the cold air. At 50, Tom was the closest thing to family Stone had in the territory. The storekeeper had been one of the first to welcome Stone after the war, when many viewed former Union men with suspicion. "Bit late for social calls," Stone said, stepping aside to let Tom enter. "Heard gunshots earlier," Tom replied, removing his gloves. "Figured I'd check if you were still breathing." Stone poured another whiskey and handed it to his friend. "Rustlers. Took care of 2. Third one's spreading the word." Yuppie nodded, understanding the economy of Stone's justice. "Williams's boy found his father yesterday. Buried him on the South Ridge." Stone's jaw tightened. Anyone claiming responsibility? Word is it's Reynolds's gang moving north from Wyoming. getting bolder. Tom swirled his whiskey. Sheriff Donovan's too busy courting votes to do much about it. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Tom studied his friend with knowing eyes. "You're getting older, Stone. We all are." Stone grunted noncommittally. "Ever think about not spending every winter alone up here?" Tom continued, "talking to yourself and that horse. Merlin's better company than most." Tom sighed. "You know what I mean. A woman might do you good. Someone to come home to." Stone's expression darkened. "Had that once. Didn't take. Sarah was a fool," Tom said bluntly. "Not all women are like her." The mention of his former fiancée sent Stone's mind drifting back. Sarah Whitfield Judge's daughter waiting faithfully while he fought, until she wasn't. Her letter had been brief. She couldn't tie herself to a man who might return, changed, or not return at all. By the time Stone made it back to Ohio, she was 3 months married to a banker who'd never seen battle. "Leave it be, Tom," Stone warned. Tom reached into his coat and pulled out a folded newspaper. "Thought you might be interested in this. Helena Weekly from 2 weeks back." Stone unfolded the paper, eyebrow-raising at what Tom had circled advertisements for mail-order brides. Women seeking new lives in the West, escaping whatever drove them from the East. "You've lost your mind," Stone said, tossing the paper onto the table. "Just think about it," Tom persisted. "Winter's coming. Longest one's the hardest." He drained his whiskey. "Might be nice to have someone to share it with. Someone who chose this life, who knows what they're getting into." After Tom left, Stone sat staring at the newspaper. The idea was absurd. What woman would want a scarred ex-soldier living in wilderness? What would he even write? "Former Union scout seeks wife. Must tolerate nightmares and long silences." Yet, as the night deepened, Stone found himself at his table, lamp burning low, pen in hand. He crumpled several attempts before settling on stark honesty. "Frontier man seeks strong-willed wife. Life here is harsh, dangerous, but honest. No need for beauty, need for courage. Must not fear guns or winter. Homestead established, future uncertain. Reply to S. McRae, Elk Fork Station, Montana Territory." Nora Hart stood across the street from Hart's Bakery, watching strangers enter what had once been her family's livelihood. The sign had been painted over, but she could still see the faint outline of her father's name beneath the new lettering. 1 year since her father's death. 1 year of selling possessions to cover debts. And now, standing in Boston's chill autumn air, Nora had just sold her engagement ring, the final reminder of a future that had crumbled like stale bread. At 28, she was alone. No family, no prospects, and a dwindling reputation. Boston society had ways of punishing women who failed to meet expectations. A canceled engagement raised eyebrows. When word spread that the cancellation stemmed from her inability to bear children, those eyebrows transformed into whispers behind fans and closed doors. "Miss Hart." Nora turned to find Mrs. Abernathy, her landlady, approaching with determined steps. "I've come to remind you that rent is due tomorrow," the woman said, eyes darting to Nora's simple dress, noting every sign of financial strain. "I'll have it," Nora replied, feeling the weight of the coins from her ring sale in her pocket. "Enough for rent, with precious little remaining." Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. "See that you do. I've 3 families inquiring about your rooms." As the woman walked away, Nora caught sight of a familiar figure exiting the bakery. Edmund Vale, tall and impeccably dressed, his father's golden watch chain gleaming against his waistcoat. Once her fiancé, now her family's primary creditor. Their eyes met briefly before Nora turned away, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of her acknowledgement. Too late. He was already crossing the street toward her. "Miss Hart," Edmund said, his voice carrying the polished tones of Harvard education. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Vale," she responded, keeping her voice level. "I was just leaving. I've been meaning to speak with you," he continued, falling into step beside her. "About your father's outstanding debts." Nora's stomach tightened. "I've been making payments as agreed." "Yes, but at the current rate, you'll be paying well into your 40s. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I might have a more expedient solution." "I'm not interested in your charity, Mr. Vale." "Not charity, employment." Edmund lowered his voice. "My household requires management. A position of personal secretary would suit someone of your background." The implication hung between them unmistakable in his tone. A position that would require more than secretarial duties, one that would place her firmly under his control while preserving the facade of respectability. "I would rather starve," Nora said quietly. Edmund's pleasant mask slipped momentarily. "That may well be your alternative, Miss Hart. Boston has limited opportunities for women in your situation. Good day, Mr. Vale." Nora quickened her pace, heart pounding with indignation and fear. Back in her small rented room, Nora paced the worn floorboards. Edmund's offer confirmed her worst fears. There was no future for her in Boston. Each day brought her closer to complete destitution, and with it, choices no woman should have to make. Her gaze fell on the newspaper she'd purchased with a precious penny. She'd been searching for employment advertisements, but had found none suitable for a baker's daughter with little formal education. As she flipped through the pages, a different section caught her eye: Opportunities Out West. Among listings for gold prospecting ventures and land claims was a column of advertisements from men seeking wives. Frontiermen, farmers, ranchers, men who had established homesteads but lacked partners to share them. Most sought young women for traditional marriages and large families. Nora was about to turn the page when one advertisement stood out. "Frontier man seeks strong-willed wife. Life here is harsh, dangerous, but honest. No need for beauty, need for courage. Must not fear guns or winter. Homestead established, future uncertain. Reply to S. McRae, Elk Fork Station, Montana Territory." No mention of children, no flowery promises, just stark honesty about a difficult life that required courage. Nora read it 3 times, something stirring within her. Montana Territory, as far from Boston and Edmund Vale as one could get. A place where no one knew her history or whispered about her defect. Before she could reconsider, Nora found paper and pen. Her first letter was formal, inquiring about basic details. His response came 6 weeks later, brief but surprisingly thoughtful. He described his homestead, 160 acres with cabin, stable, and workshop. His livelihood, hunting, trapping, occasional work for the territorial marshal, and asked practical questions about her skills and expectations. Her second letter shared more about herself, her background in baking, her father's death, her comfort with hard work. She mentioned nothing about her canceled engagement or medical condition. In her third letter, after another exchange, Nora finally gathered her courage. "Mr. McRae, honesty compels me to share something that has affected my prospects here in Boston. Doctors have determined that due to a physical abnormality, I am unlikely to bear children. I would understand completely if this changes your interest in our correspondence." His reply arrived faster than expected, a single page in a strong, slanted hand. "Miss Hart, I'm not seeking someone to bear children, but someone to build a life with. The West creates more orphans than it needs new births. What matters is your willingness to face this life with clear eyes and steady hands. If you're still interested, enclosed is money for train passage to Helena, then stagecoach to Elk Fork. I'll meet you there first Tuesday of December. If you don't arrive, I'll understand. S. McRae. Nora stared at the train ticket in disbelief. This stranger, this S. McRae, had offered her something no one in Boston would, a chance based on who she was, not what her body could or couldn't do. That night, as she carefully packed her few belongings, a knock came at her door. Edmund Vale stood in the hallway, his expression no longer maintaining any pretense of civility. "I've been informed you've given notice," he said coldly. "Planning to flee your obligations, I've arranged to continue payments through Mr. Blackwell's office." Nora replied, thankful she'd had the foresight to establish this arrangement with her father's former lawyer. "Payments from where exactly? I've made inquiries. You have no employment awaiting you elsewhere." His eyes narrowed. "Unless you're planning to engage in activities that would shock Boston society even more than your current situation." "My plans are my own concern, Mr. Vale. Your debts make them my concern." He stepped closer. "Your father borrowed substantial sums from my family. Legally, I could have you arrested for attempting to flee your obligations. Debtor's prison isn't pleasant for women, Miss Hart." The threat hung in the air between them. Nora's mind raced. Edmund had connections throughout Boston, including with the police. Whether his threat was legally sound or not, he could make it reality. "I'll expect you in my office tomorrow to discuss your repayment plan," he continued, "or I'll be forced to take more official action." After he left, Nora made her decision. She would not wait until morning. Gathering only what she could carry in one bag, she slipped out into the night, leaving most of her possessions behind. By dawn, she was on a train heading west, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and exhilaration. She was leaving everything she knew, heading toward a stranger in a dangerous wilderness. But for the first time in years, Nora Hart was choosing her own fate. Stone stood on the station platform, watching the stagecoach approach through swirling snow. November had brought early winter to Elk Fork, the mountains already white-capped, the air carrying the promise of a harsh season ahead. He'd half convinced himself she wouldn't come. Why would any woman of sense trade Boston civilization for Montana wilderness? Yet here, he was freshly shaved, wearing his least worn shirt, under a heavy coat, scanning the faces of disembarking passengers. Only one woman stepped down, slender, brown-haired, dressed too lightly for Montana weather. She clutched a single carpetbag, eyes searching the small crowd until they landed on Stone. He recognized something in her expression. Wariness, yes, but also determination. The look of someone who had made a difficult choice and wouldn't back down from it. "Mr. McRae," she asked as he approached. "Stone," he corrected, awkward after so many months of solitude. "Most folks just call me Stone." "Nora Hart," she said, offering her gloved hand. Her handshake was firmer than he expected. Stone took her bag, noting how light it was. "This, all you brought?" "All I could bring," she answered, a shadow crossing her face. As they walked toward his wagon, Stone noticed she drew curious glances from townsfolk. Elk Fork had fewer than 300 souls, and newcomers were rare, especially women traveling alone to meet unmarried men. "We should get moving," Stone said, helping her onto the wagon seat. "Storm's coming in faster than expected. It's a 3-hour drive to the homestead in good weather." Nora nodded, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Stone draped a buffalo hide over her lap before climbing up beside her. "Thank you," she said quietly. As they left town, Stone felt the weight of her presence beside him. the first person to share his wagon seat in years. The silence grew uncomfortable until Nora broke it. "How long have you lived here, Mr. McRae?" 15 years, since the war." He kept his eyes on the trail. "And it's Stone. Were you in the Union Army?" Stone nodded, hands tightening imperceptibly on the reins. "Scout and sharpshooter with the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, Berdan's men." "My father wanted to enlist," she offered. "His lungs weren't strong enough. He baked bread for the soldiers instead." The mention of baking stirred Stone's memory. "You wrote your father owned a bakery." "For 30 years. It was everything to him." Her voice carried a weight of loss. They fell silent again as the wagon climbed higher, the trail narrowing. Snow began to fall more heavily, and Stone urged the horses to a faster pace. "There are things you should know," he said abruptly, "about the valley, about why I live here." Nora turned to him, waiting. "This isn't just wilderness. It's contested land." Stone's voice took on a harder edge. "Reynolds' gang has been moving into the territory, taking what they want. Laws stretched thin. Marshall comes through maybe twice a year." "Is that why you asked if I fear guns?" Stone nodded grimly. "First thing I'll teach you is how to shoot. Not for hunting, for survival." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "Still time to turn back." Nora looked ahead at the snowy trail, then back to Stone. "I didn't come 3,000 miles to turn back at the first mention of danger, Mr. McRae." Something almost like a smile touched Stone's weathered face. "Didn't figure you for the type." As the wagon climbed higher, Stone pointed out landmarks. Eagle Rock, where mountain lions sometimes sunned themselves. Widow's Creek, named for a woman who'd lost her husband to flash flooding. The ridge where he'd tracked a grizzly last spring. "The valley opens up beyond that next rise," Stone said as they approached a narrow pass. "Homesteads built against the eastern slope. Good water sheltered from worst winds defensible." That last word hung between them, a reminder that in this place, homes needed to be defended. The pass opened to reveal a sweeping vista of pine-covered slopes surrounding a valley cupped like hands holding something precious. Fresh snow blanketed everything, pristine and untouched. At the valley's edge, smoke rose from a sturdy cabin nestled against the mountainside. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed momentarily, forgetting the cold. Stone didn't respond, but his expression softened as he looked over his domain. This land had saved him when he'd returned from war, broken in ways no one could see. He'd poured his nightmares into cutting trees, shaping logs, building something that would last, when so much had been destroyed. As they approached the cabin, Nora could see it was larger than she'd expected. Built for permanence, with a covered porch, solid shutters, and a stone chimney. Nearby stood a stable workshop and what appeared to be a smokehouse. Behind the cabin, a fenced garden lay dormant under snow. Stone brought the wagon to a stop. "Home," he said simply. Helping Nora down, he noticed her shivering despite the buffalo robe. The temperature had dropped sharply with the approaching storm. "Let's get you inside," he said. "Then I'll see to the horses." The cabin's interior was warmer than Nora expected, a banked fire glowing in a large stone fireplace. The main room held a table, chairs, and cooking area. A curtained doorway likely led to sleeping quarters. Everything was neat, utilitarian, built for function rather than comfort. Yet there was beauty in the craftsmanship. Every piece of furniture showed careful workmanship. The floors were swept clean and shelves held an unexpected number of books. "It's not much," Stone said, misreading her silence for disappointment. "No, it's—" Nora searched for the right word. "Honest, like you said in your letter." Stone nodded, something in his posture relaxing slightly. "Fire needs stoking. Make yourself at home. I'll be back after I settle the horses." When the door closed behind him, Nora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was real. She'd left everything behind for this cabin, this valley, this taciturn man with watchful eyes. She moved to the fireplace, adding logs from the nearby stack. As flames leapt higher, Nora examined her surroundings more carefully. The bookshelf held volumes of history practical guides to hunting and trapping, and surprisingly, several works of Shakespeare and Thoreau. A gun rack on the wall held 3 rifles and a shotgun, all well-maintained. Above the mantel hung a single photograph, a younger Stone in Union uniform standing with 3 other soldiers. The sound of the door opening made Nora turn. Stone stamped snow from his boots, carrying her carpetbag. "Storm's picking up," he said. "We're in for a long night." Well, he set her bag down, then moved to a cabinet, removing 2 tin cups and a bottle. He poured amber liquid into each, offering one to Nora. "To warm the blood," he explained. Nora accepted the whiskey, taking a small sip that burned all the way down. Stone watched her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "There's something we need to discuss," he said finally. "About arrangements." Nora steeled herself. Here it was, what he really expected from this arrangement. "I proposed marriage in my letters," Stone continued. "But I'm not holding you to anything. 3 months." 3 months, Nora repeated, confused. "Trial period. You see if you can stand this place and me." His eyes met hers directly. "If you want to leave after winter, I'll pay your way back east. No obligations." Nora stared at him, caught off guard by this unexpected consideration. "And if I stay, then we marry properly, if that's what you want." Stone's gaze was steady. "But you should know what you're agreeing to first." The howl of wind outside punctuated his words, a reminder of the wilderness surrounding them. Nora took another sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. "That seems fair," she said finally. "Though I should warn you, Mr. McRae, I didn't come all this way planning to turn back." Something that might have been approval flickered in Stone's eyes. He raised his cup slightly. "To clear eyes, then." "And steady hands," Nora finished echoing his letter. They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, several moving fast. Stone's demeanor changed instantly. He moved to the gun rack, retrieving a rifle with practiced ease. "Stay away from the windows," he ordered, his voice dropping to a deadly calm that raised the hair on Nora's neck. "Visitors this time of night in this weather, not bringing good news." He positioned himself beside a window, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters. Nora stood frozen, the whiskey cup still in her hand, as shouted voices carried through the howling wind. "McRae, we know you're in there," a man's voice called. "Jack Reynolds wants a word about those men you killed." Stone's face hardened into something Nora barely recognized, the face of a hunter, a soldier, a killer. In that moment, she realized how little she knew about this man, whose home she'd entered, whose life she'd agreed to share. "Seems you've arrived just in time for a proper Montana welcome, Miss Hart," Stone said grimly, checking his rifle's action. "Hope you meant what you said about not fearing guns." "Get down," Stone hissed, moving with surprising speed for a man his size. He pushed Nora to the floor, behind the heavy oak table, positioning himself at the window, with a clear line of sight to the approaching riders. "McRae," the voice outside called again. "We just want to talk about our friends you shot." Stone's face was a mask of concentration as he assessed the threat. 5 riders, 2 hanging back near the trees. Jack Reynolds never comes himself, sends his brother Caleb to do his dirty work. "What do they want?" Nora whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Stone could hear it. "Revenge. Or they think they do." Stone checked the cylinder on his Colt. 2 weeks back, I killed 2 men rustling cattle. They'd murdered old Jeb Williams, left him for scavengers. The sound of horses moving closer drove Nora further behind the table. Despite her brave words earlier, she'd never been this close to violence. "Last chance, McRae," the voice called. "Come out and face us like a man." Stone glanced at Nora. "Stay down, no matter what you hear." "What are you going to do?" Fear made her voice tight. Stone's smile was cold. "What I do best." He moved silently to the door, staying to the shadows. "When I go out, bolt this behind me." Before Nora could protest, Stone slipped outside. She scrambled to the door, sliding the heavy wooden bolt into place with shaking hands. Through a small window, she could see Stone standing on the porch, rifle at his side, facing the mounted men. Snow swirled around them in the gathering darkness. "Caleb Reynolds," Stone's voice carried clearly. "Long way from your usual haunts." A heavy-set man on a dappled gray horse leaned forward. "You killed my cousins, McRae. Family business now." "Your cousins killed an innocent man," Stone replied evenly. "I gave the third one a chance to deliver a message: stay out of my valley." "Jack doesn't recognize your claim to this valley," Caleb spat. "Says any man stupid enough to live alone in these mountains deserves what he gets." Stone remained unnervingly calm. "I'm not alone tonight, Caleb, and I count 5 of you against 1 of me. Those aren't odds I like." "Then surrender. We'll make it quick." "No," Stone said. "I meant they aren't fair to you." What happened next occurred so swiftly that Nora could barely follow. Stone dropped to one knee as the first shot came from the trees, exactly where he'd expected an ambush. His rifle cracked once, twice. A man screamed from the shadows. Caleb and the others scrambled for cover as Stone fired again, his movements economical, practiced. Nora watched in horrified fascination. This wasn't a brawl or a duel. This was warfare. Stone moved from cover to cover, using the darkness and his knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect. He never wasted a motion or a bullet. A stray shot shattered the window next to Nora. She dropped to the floor, heart racing, as glass rained around her. Outside, men were shouting, horses screaming. Another shot, then silence. "Enough!" Caleb's voice carried across the yard. "McRae, we're leaving, but this isn't over." The sound of retreating horses filtered through the broken window. Nora remained frozen, unsure if the danger had truly passed. Minutes later, a knock came at the door. "Nora, it's Stone. Open up." She rushed to unbolt the door. Stone stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, rifle still in hand. A dark stain spread across his left sleeve. "You're hurt," she gasped. "Grazed." He stepped inside, scanning her quickly for injuries. "You all right?" Nora nodded, still shaking. "I think so. The window can be fixed." Stone set his rifle down and shrugged out of his coat, wincing. "They won't be back tonight. Wounded, too. They'll need to lick their wounds." As the adrenaline ebbed, Nora's practical nature reasserted itself. "Let me see your arm." Stone hesitated, then sat at the table while Nora gathered water and clean cloths. She worked in silence, cutting away his sleeve to reveal a bloody furrow across his bicep. "Not as bad as it could be," she murmured, cleaning the wound. Stone watched her work, his expression unreadable. "Do you have whiskey to clean it?" He nodded toward the bottle they'd shared earlier. Nora poured a measure over the wound, and Stone hissed through clenched teeth. "Sorry," she said automatically. "Don't be. You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Nora's hands were steady, her movements confident. My father fought in street riots during the Panic of '57. Came home with worse than this. As she bandaged his arm, Nora's mind raced with questions. The man beside her had just fought off 5 armed men with the skill of a trained soldier. Not the isolated mountain man she'd imagined, but something far more dangerous. "So," she said, finally tying off the bandage, "this is what you meant by life here is harsh." Stone's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. This was just a greeting. Despite everything, Nora found herself laughing, a short, brittle sound that nonetheless broke the tension. Stone's shoulders relaxed slightly. "They'll be back," he said, sobering. "Reynolds doesn't let go easily." "Then we'll be ready," Nora replied, surprising herself with her resolve. Stone studied her face as if seeing something new. "Tomorrow, we start your training. How to shoot, how to hide, how to survive." He paused. "Still want that 3-month trial." Nora thought of Boston, of Edmund Vale, of the life she'd left behind. Danger here was honest, at least. It came with shouting and gunfire, not whispers behind fans and legal threats. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm staying." Later, as Stone showed her to the small second bedroom, previously his workshop hastily converted for her arrival, Nora realized she'd made her choice. Whatever this new life held, whatever dangers lurked in the valley, she wouldn't run. Stone paused at the doorway. "Sleep while you can. Dawn comes early, and we have much to do." "Mr. McRae," she called as he turned to leave, "thank you for defending your home, for defending me." He looked back, something softening in his weathered face. "Stone," he corrected quietly. "Just Stone." The next morning broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Nora woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and emerged to find Stone already repairing the broken window. "Morning," he said without looking up from his work. "Coffee's hot. Biscuits in the Dutch oven." Nora poured herself a cup, surprised to find the coffee strong but good. The biscuits were edible if heavy, clearly made by someone who cooked from necessity rather than skill. "I can take over the cooking," she offered, remembering her training in her father's bakery. Stone nodded, seemingly relieved. "Wouldn't mind. Never could get biscuits right." After breakfast, Stone led her outside. The homestead looked different in daylight, more expansive, with cleared land extending from the cabin to a line of pines some 100 yards distant. Beyond that, forest climbed the mountainside. Fresh snow covered everything, marred only by their footprints, and the disturbed area where last night's confrontation had occurred. Stone walked her through the property, pointing out features she hadn't seen in the darkness, the spring that provided water year-round. The cellar dug into the hillside where he stored preserved food. The small apple orchard he'd started 5 years back now, dormant for winter. "Garden there," he indicated a fenced plot behind the cabin. "Good soil, grows more than I need." Nora noticed something in his tone when he spoke of growing things, a pride different from when he discussed hunting or defense. Here was the man who'd created this place, not just the warrior who protected it. Their tour ended at the workshop, a solidly built structure with a small forge, woodworking tools, and what appeared to be a tanning rack. "Make most everything I need," Stone explained. "Furniture repairs, leather work." He hesitated. "Also where we'll start your training." From a locked cabinet, Stone withdrew a Colt revolver smaller than his own. "Smith & Wesson Model 3, lighter than mine, better for smaller hands." He placed it in Nora's hands. She was surprised by its weight, the cold metal warming slowly in her grip. "First rule, every gun is loaded, even when it isn't." Stone guided her hands into proper position. Second rule, never point at anything you don't intend to kill. For the next hour, he drilled her on basic handling, how to load and unload, how to check the cylinder and hammer. Nora listened intently, aware that this knowledge might someday save her life, or his. When they moved outside to practice firing, Stone set up targets against a dirt embankment. Breathe normal. Squeeze. Don't pull. Let the shot surprise you. Nora's first attempt went wild, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. Stone adjusted her stance, his hands firm but respectful on her shoulders and arms. Again, he instructed. By her fifth shot, Nora was hitting the broad target regularly. Not accurately, but at least connecting with the wood. Good start, Stone said, sounding genuinely impressed. Most folks can't hit anything their first day. As they walked back to the cabin for midday meal, Nora found herself studying Stone with new eyes. The man was a contradiction, a skilled killer who crafted beautiful furniture, a solitary soul who'd advertised for companionship, a hardened veteran who handled her training with unexpected patience. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Just wondering who taught you," Nora replied, "to shoot like that." Something dark crossed Stone's face. "Army taught basics. Rest I learned in the field." He paused. "Was good at it. Too good, maybe. You were a sharpshooter, you said." Stone nodded, his eyes distant. "Berdan wanted men who could hit a target at 600 yards. I could do 800. The pride in his voice was tempered with something else. Regret, perhaps. "Made me valuable. Also made me something I didn't always recognize." They'd reached the cabin porch. Stone stopped, looking out over the valley. "War changes a man," he said quietly. "Some came back unable to sleep indoors. Some couldn't be around crowds. Some couldn't stop fighting." He turned to Nora. "I came here to find out who I was, without a rifle in my hands. 15 years later, still not sure I know." It was the most he'd spoken at once since she'd arrived. Nora sensed the importance of this rare openness. "And what about me?" she asked. "Why seek a wife after all this time alone?" Stone considered her question, his weathered face thoughtful. "Man gets tired of his own company, of talking to horses and trees." A faint smile touched his eyes. "Besides, Tom Pike wouldn't stop badgering me about it." That surprised a laugh from Nora. The idea of Stone being pressured into anything seemed incongruous with the man she was coming to know. Inside, Nora prepared a simple stew from provisions Stone had stored. As they ate, she noticed him watching her handle kitchen tasks with quiet approval. "Tomorrow we'll head to town," he announced. "Need supplies before the next storm. Also need to report last night's incident to the sheriff." "Will that help?" Nora asked skeptically. Stone's expression turned cynical. "Not likely. Sheriff Donovan's more concerned with politics than justice. But official reports matter if this escalates further." He studied her across the table. "Town also needs to see you." "See me?" "As my—" Stone searched for the appropriate word. "Intended. Stops questions. Provides protection of a sort." Nora understood. A woman alone in frontier territory was vulnerable. A woman known to be connected to Stone McRae, whom she was beginning to realize had a significant reputation, would be afforded certain considerations. "I understand," she said. "I'll need to purchase some items anyway. Winter clothing, proper boots." Stone nodded. "Anything else, make a list. 3-hour journey each way, so we'll leave at first light." That night, as Nora prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself considering how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 days. From Boston respectability to a frontier homestead under threat from outlaws. from Edmund Vale's thinly veiled propositions to Stone McRae's straightforward protection. She'd come seeking escape, but had found something unexpected, purpose, perhaps. For the first time since her father's death, Nora felt needed, not for her body or her background, but for her hands, her mind, her willingness to stand her ground. Sleep came more easily than she'd expected, the day's exertions overwhelming her anxieties. Her last thought, before drifting off, was how strange it felt to be safer here after gunfire and broken windows than she'd felt in civilized Boston. Elk Fork appeared different in daylight, a collection of rough buildings strung along a single muddy street, with mountains rising majestically behind. Perhaps 40 structures in all the town represented the furthest reach of civilization in this corner of Montana territory. Stone guided the wagon past a blacksmith's, a general store, a small church, and what appeared to be a saloon already doing business despite the early hour. A two-story building bearing the sign Elk Fork Hotel and Restaurant stood at the street's center, adjacent to a squat structure labeled Sheriff's Office. People stopped to watch them pass, some nodding respectfully to Stone, others eyeing Nora with undisguised curiosity. Word of her arrival had clearly spread. "Not much privacy in places like this," Stone murmured. "Everyone knows everyone's business." "Not so different from Boston society," Nora replied wryly. Stone tied the horses outside the sheriff's office. "I'll report last night's incident. Meet you at Pike's store in 30 minutes. He hesitated. "Folks will ask questions. Answer however you see fit." Nora appreciated his respect for her judgment. "I'll be fine. I'm getting used to being a curiosity." Pike's general store occupied a corner building with large windows displaying everything from tools to fabric. A bell jingled as Nora entered, breathing in the familiar scents of coffee, tobacco, and leather that seemed universal to general stores everywhere. A balding man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Hart Tom Pike." He came around to shake her hand vigorously. "Stone said you were coming, but I wasn't sure you'd actually make the journey." "It was quite an experience," Nora replied diplomatically. Tom Pike laughed. "I bet it was. Stone's not much for conversation on the best of days. Hope he didn't scare you off with that scowl of his." "It takes more than a scowl to frighten me, Mr. Pike." "I can see why he chose you," Pike said approvingly. "What can I help you with today?" Nora consulted her list. "Winter clothing, proper boots, some baking supplies, if you have them." As Pike gathered items, a woman entered from the back room, plump, gray-haired, with kind eyes that lit up at the sight of Nora. "You must be Stone's young lady," she exclaimed, hurrying forward. "I'm Martha Pike. So glad to finally meet you." Before Nora could respond, Martha enveloped her in a warm hug. The unexpected human contact after weeks of travel and uncertainty nearly brought tears to Nora's eyes. "Thank you for the welcome," she managed. Martha held her at arm's length, examining her with motherly concern. "You're too thin, dear. Has Stone been feeding you properly?" "Of course not. The man could burn water." She turned to her husband. "Tom added some of those dried apples and my preserves to their order." The bell jingled again as two women entered, one elderly, one perhaps Nora's age. Both immediately focused on Nora with intense curiosity. "Emma Ruth," Martha greeted them. "Come meet Miss Hartstone McRae's intended." The older woman, Emma, approached with a walker's cane. "So you're the brave soul who answered Stone's advertisement. Got more courage than sense, I suspect." "Mother," the younger woman, Ruth, admonished, "be polite." She smiled at Nora. "Ruth Bennett, schoolteacher. This is my mother, Emma Bennett. Don't mind her. She speaks plainly to everyone." "Truth needs speaking," Emma retorted. "Girl should know what she's getting into with Stone McRae." "And what would that be, Mrs. Bennet?" Nora asked evenly. Emma's eyes narrowed appraisingly. "A man who sees too much, who carries darkness from the war, who can kill from distances other men can't even see clearly." She tapped her cane for emphasis. "Also, the most honest man in the valley, and the one I'd want nearby if trouble came." Before Nora could respond, the store door opened again. Stone entered his tall frame, filling the doorway, his expression guarded as he took in the gathering. "Ladies," he acknowledged with a nod. "Tom, Mrs. Pike." "Stone McRae," Emma said without preamble. "I was just telling your intended about your virtues and vices." "Imagine you covered the vices thoroughly," Stone replied dryly. "Just getting started," Emma shot back, but there was something like affection in her tone. Martha Pike stepped in. "Stone, I've invited you and Miss Hart to supper tonight. No arguments. The girl needs a proper meal and some female company." Stone looked to Nora, silently deferring to her preference. The consideration wasn't lost on the watching women. "We'd be honored, Mrs. Pike," Nora answered, "though we should return before dark." "Of course," Martha beamed. "Tom's just finishing your order. Ruth, help me set another place at the table." As the women dispersed, Stone moved closer to Nora. "Sheriff's report filed. Not that it'll do much good." His voice lowered. "Also received a telegram from Helena. U.S. Marshal Jenkins arriving next week. Good man. Actually enforces the law." "That's encouraging," Nora replied. Stone's expression remained grim. "Could make things worse before better. Reynolds might accelerate plans if he knows federal law's coming." Their conversation was interrupted by Tom Pike's return with their supplies. "All set, Stone. Put it on your account. Add Miss Hart's purchases separately," Stone instructed. "She'll have her own account." Both Pike and Nora looked surprised. Stone shrugged. "Independent means independent account. Fair's fair." This small act of respect, acknowledging Nora as a person with her own standing, not merely an extension of himself, struck her deeply. In Boston, even Edmund had always treated her father's debts as leverage over her, never considering her autonomy. "Thank you," she said quietly. Stone nodded once, then turned to Pike. "Any news about Reynolds?" "Word is Jack's gathering men north of here," Pike replied, voice lowered. "At least 15, maybe 20. Some locals, some hired guns from Wyoming territory." "Sounds like more than a simple vendetta," Nora observed. "It is," Stone agreed grimly. "Reynolds wants this valley. Has for years. Land's valuable. Water access, good grazing timber. Railroad surveys marked it for potential development. Your homestead blocks the most accessible pass," Pike added for Nora's benefit. "Control the valley." The implications settled heavily. The attack on Stone's cabin wasn't random violence. It was the opening move in a calculated land grab. And now Nora was caught in the middle. Outside the store, Stone loaded their supplies, while Nora considered this new information. The situation was more dangerous than she'd initially understood. Yet Stone had been transparent about the risks from the beginning. His advertisement had promised danger alongside honesty. As they prepared to visit other businesses in town, a commotion drew their attention to the saloon. A man staggered out clearly drunk, despite the early hour bellowing challenges to no one in particular. "Sam Dalton," Stone explained quietly. "Ranch hand. Drinks his pay faster than he earns it." The man spotted them across the street, his bleary eyes focusing with sudden intensity. "McRae," he shouted, "that the mail-order bride everyone's talking about." Stone's posture shifted subtly, one hand dropping to rest near his holstered Colt. "Go back inside, Sam." Instead, Dalton lurched toward them, drawing stares from passers-by. "Heard you had trouble with Reynolds boys last night," he slurred. "Gonna have more trouble soon. Jack's offering good money to anyone who helps clear you out." "Is that a threat, Sam?" Stone's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. "Just truth." Dalton swayed unsteadily. "Whole town knows Reynolds is coming for you, bringing enough men to overrun that cabin of yours." His gaze shifted to Nora, a leer forming. "Shame about the lady. Maybe she should reconsider her options while she can." Stone moved with shocking speed. Before Dalton could react, Stone had him by the collar, lifting him nearly off his feet. "Apologize to the lady," Stone said quietly. Dalton's bravado evaporated. "No offense meant," he stammered, "just repeating what I heard." Stone released him with a slight push. "Go sleep it off, Sam. And tell Reynolds's other informants I'm not interested in his warnings." As Dalton slunk away, Nora realized they'd drawn a small crowd. Faces watched from storefronts, assessing, judging. Some sympathetic, others calculating. In that moment, she understood that her arrival had changed the equation in Elk Fork. Stone was no longer just a solitary figure on the mountain. He had someone who could be threatened, leveraged, harmed. "Perhaps we should complete our errands quickly," she suggested. Stone nodded, his expression unreadable. "One more stop. Gunsmith. You'll need your own rifle." The remainder of their visit passed without incident, though Nora felt eyes following them everywhere. By the time they arrived at the Pikes' home for supper, she was exhausted from the constant scrutiny. Martha Pike's home reflected her personality. Warm, welcoming, filled with small touches that transformed a frontier house into a home. Curtains at the windows, braided rugs on the floors, a tablecloth for supper. Nora hadn't realized how much she'd missed these feminine comforts until she saw them again. The meal was simple but abundant: roast venison, potatoes, bread, and Martha's preserved vegetables. Ruth Bennett joined them, bringing apple pie for dessert. Stone sat somewhat awkwardly at the table, clearly unaccustomed to social gatherings, but making an effort for Nora's sake. After the meal, Tom drew Stone aside to discuss business, leaving Nora with the women in the parlor. It was the first time she'd been apart from Stone since her arrival. "Now, dear," Martha said warmly, "you must tell us about yourself. Boston it's such a long journey." Bora shared an edited version of her story: her father's bakery, his death, her decision to seek a new beginning out west. She omitted Edmund Vale and the doctor's pronouncements, not ready to share those vulnerabilities. "And how are you finding life with our Stone?" Ruth asked with genuine interest. "Different than expected," Nora admitted. "But not in bad ways. He's been considerate." Martha nodded approvingly. "Stone's rough around the edges but solid at the core. Takes responsibility seriously." "Too seriously," Ruth added. "Carries the weight of the whole valley sometimes." "What do you mean?" Nora asked. Martha and Ruth exchanged glances. "Stone's more than just a homesteader," Martha explained. "When law's too distant, when troubles come, folks turn to him. Has been that way since he drove off the Blackfoot raiding party in '75. Before my time," Ruth added, "but they say he tracked them for 3 days, rescued 2 kidnapped children." "Never talks about it," Martha confirmed. "Just does what needs doing." Nora absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the complex man she'd agreed to marry. Not just a former soldier seeking solitude, but a reluctant protector who'd carved out a place in this community despite his preference for isolation. "Reynolds knows that too," Martha continued, lowering her voice. "Why he wants Stone gone so badly. People respect Stone, follow his lead. Without him, Valley would be easier pickings. I see, Nora said quietly. The stakes were higher than personal property. Stone stood as a bulwark against those who would exploit the region, and now she stood with him, for better or worse. When Stone and Tom rejoined them, Nora noticed Stone's expression had darkened. Something in their conversation had troubled him. "Time to head back," he announced. "Want to be home before full dark." The Pikes walked them to their wagon, loading it with additional food Martha insisted they take. As Stone helped Nora onto the seat, Tom clasped his shoulder. "Think about what I said," the storekeeper urged. "Offers open any time." Stone nodded without elaboration. As they pulled away, Nora waited until they were clear of town before asking the obvious question, "What offer?" Stone's jaw tightened. "Tom offered his back storeroom if we wanted to stay in town for a while. Says the cabin's too isolated with Reynolds gathering forces." "And what do you think?" His hands tightened on the reins. "Cabin's more defensible. I know every approach, every hiding place. In town, too many variables." Nora studied his profile sharp against the evening sky. "There's more to it than tactical considerations." Stone was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. "That land is mine. 15 years of sweat and blood. My hands cut every tree, shaped every board in that cabin. If I abandon it now, everything I've built since the war means nothing." The raw emotion in his voice surprised her. Stone McRae, the stoic mountain man, revealing the depth of his connection to his homestead. "Then we defend it," Nora said simply. Stone glanced at her sharply. You've only just arrived. This isn't your fight." "I made it my fight when I stepped off that stagecoach," Nora replied firmly. "I didn't come 3,000 miles to run at the first sign of trouble." As something shifted in Stone's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Most women would be demanding I take them back to civilization by now." "I'm not most women, Mr. McRae." Nora adjusted her new gloves, thicker and warmer than her Boston ones. "Besides, civilization has its own dangers. At least here the threats are honest." Stone's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. "That they are." As the wagon climbed higher into the mountains, Nora felt a strange sense of rightness. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, possibly fatal, but it was a path she'd chosen freely, with open eyes. Whatever came, she would face it beside this complicated, honorable man who asked only for courage and honesty in return. The homestead came into view just as dusk was settling over the valley. Stone tensed suddenly, pulling the wagon to a halt. "Something's wrong," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Nora scanned the cabin and outbuildings. "I don't see anything. Smoke's wrong. Fire's been disturbed." Stone reached for his rifle. "And Merlin should have whinnied by now. He always does when we return." He handed Nora the reins. "Stay with the wagon. If you hear shooting, get back to town fast, as these horses will carry you." Before she could protest, Stone had slipped into the trees beside the trail, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Nora's heart pounded as she waited, straining to hear anything beyond the soft snorting of the horses and the wind in the pines. Minutes stretched endlessly. Then a sharp crack echoed through the valley. A single gunshot. Nora froze, torn between Stone's instructions and her own instincts. Before she could decide, Stone emerged from the trees, expression grim. "Reynolds's men," he confirmed. 4 of them, waiting inside." "Are they—" Nora couldn't finish the question. "One's dead. Others ran." Stone's voice was flat. "But they left us a message." He helped her down from the wagon, leading her cautiously toward the cabin. As they approached, Nora could see the door hanging open, windows broken. Inside, destruction greeted them. Furniture overturned, supplies, scattered stones, books torn and trampled. On the main wall, written in what appeared to be animal blood, were the words, "Next time we burn it all." Stone surveyed the damage, his face hardening into something Nora barely recognized, the face of a soldier returning to war. "Get what you need," he said quietly. "We're not staying here tonight." "We can't just abandon the homestead," Nora protested, as Stone gathered ammunition from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. "Not abandoning," he corrected grimly. "Retreating temporarily. Tactical decision." He worked methodically, collecting essentials while scanning for traps. "Reynolds's men will return with reinforcements. Need to regroup, prepare." The destruction around them told a story of calculated intimidation. The Vandals had taken particular care to destroy items of personal value. Books slashed a hand-carved chess set, smashed the mantel photograph of Stone with his fellow soldiers thrown into the fireplace. Yet they'd left the weapons rack untouched. Not theft, but message. "Where will we go?" Nora asked, gathering her own belongings. "Trapper's cabin, 2 miles up valley, well hidden." Stone handed her a leather satchel. "Take only what you need. We travel light." As Nora packed, a thought struck her. What about Merlin? Stone's expression darkened. "Found him in the stable, hamstrung." His voice held controlled fury. "Had to put him down." The deliberate cruelty of the act stunned Nora. This wasn't just business. This was personal vendetta designed to provoke Stone into rash action. "I'm sorry," she said softly, understanding the bond between a frontierman and his horse. Stone nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. "Wagon's too conspicuous. We go on foot through the trees." By the time they left, dusk had settled over the valley. Stone led her along game trails barely visible in the fading light, moving with the silent confidence of a man who knew every inch of his territory. Nora struggled to keep pace, grateful for the new boots purchased in town. "Stay in my tracks," Stone instructed. "Less noise that way." The forest grew denser as they climbed higher pine branches heavy with snow. Despite her exhaustion, Nora found herself struck by the wild beauty surrounding them, stark white against deep green moonlight, creating silver patterns on the forest floor. In another circumstance, it might have been enchanting. An hour into their journey, Stone stopped suddenly, raising a hand for silence. Nora froze, straining to hear what had alerted him. Nothing but the soft sigh of wind through pines reached her ears. "What is it?" she whispered after a long moment. Stone pointed to a barely visible track crossing their path. A single line of footprints partially filled with fresh snow. One man, moving fast. Recent. His voice was a low rumble. Not Reynolds's men. Different boot pattern. Friend or foe? Unknown. Stone studied the tracks. Heading toward the homestead. May have missed us by minutes. They continued with greater caution, Stone frequently pausing to check for signs of pursuit. The moon climbed higher, casting enough light to navigate by, but also increasing their visibility. Nora found herself painfully aware of how exposed they were. 2 figures moving through silent woods, leaving tracks any competent hunter could follow. Finally, a dark shape emerged from the trees, a small cabin built so naturally into the landscape that Nora would have missed it entirely without Stone's guidance. Unlike his homestead, this structure seemed designed for concealment rather than comfort. "Hunting cabin," Stone explained, examining the door for signs of disturbance before cautiously pushing it open. "Built it my 2nd year here. Few people know of it." The interior was sparse, a single room with stone fireplace, narrow cot, rough table and chair. No windows, only small ventilation slits high in the walls. A place designed for survival, not living. Stone lit a small lamp, revealing shelves stocked with preserved food ammunition and medical supplies. "Emergency cash," he said, noting Nora's surprised expression. "Never know when you might need to disappear for a while." The practiced efficiency with which Stone prepared the cabin spoke of experience beyond simple frontier wisdom. This was military thinking, establishing fallback positions, maintaining supply caches, preparing for contingencies. Nora wondered just how often Stone had needed to disappear over the years. "You've done this before," she observed as he kindled a small, smokeless fire. Stone paused, then nodded. "After the war, took time to adjust. Sometimes needed solitude more than usual." His hands moved automatically arranging kindling. Also useful during Indian troubles in '75. As the cabin warmed, Stone unrolled a crude map onto the table. "We're here," he indicated with a calloused finger. "Homestead here. Town here." He traced potential routes between points. "Reynolds likely has men watching main trails. Need to think like quarry, not hunter." Nora leaned forward, studying the map. "What's the plan? Wait until Marshal Jenkins arrives next week. Federal authority changes things. Reynolds won't risk open conflict with U.S. law. And until then," Stone's expression hardened, "survive, observe, prepare." Later, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Nora considered their situation. 5 days ago, she'd been on a train heading west, running from Edmund Vale's threats. Now, she sat in a hidden cabin with a frontier vigilante planning strategy against outlaw raiders. The absurdity might have made her laugh if the danger weren't so real. "You could still leave," Stone said suddenly, reading her thoughts with unnerving accuracy. "Stage to Helena runs Tuesdays and Fridays. Be back in civilization before Christmas." Nora met his gaze across the small fire. "Are you trying to be rid of me, Mr. McRae?" "Being practical. You didn't sign on for a war." "Actually, I believe your advertisement mentioned life here being harsh, dangerous, but honest." Nora's voice carried unexpected steel. "I'm not abandoning you to face this alone." Something shifted in Stone's weathered face. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. "Besides," she added practically, "I've nowhere else to go. Boston holds nothing for me now." Stone nodded slowly, accepting her decision. "Get some sleep," he said after a moment. "I'll take first watch." The narrow cot was hardly comfortable, but exhaustion overtook Nora quickly. She drifted to sleep, watching Stone's silhouette against the low firelight rifle across his knees, a sentinel between her and the dangers lurking in the darkness. For 3 days they remained at the trapper's cabin, venturing out only for necessities. Stone taught Nora woodland skills, how to move silently, how to recognize signs of human passage, how to cover their tracks. Each morning, he reconnoitered the surrounding area, returning with reports of increased activity in the valley. "Reynolds's men," he confirmed after the third such expedition. "At least 10, maybe 15, setting up camp near the eastern ridge." "Preparing to attack the homestead?" Nora asked. "No, waiting." Stone cleaned his rifle as he spoke, hands moving with practiced precision. "They found the cabin empty. Now they're watching, expecting us to return or show ourselves in town." "What about Tom and Martha Pike, the others in town?" Stone's expression tightened. "Reynolds won't harm townsfolk yet. Bad for business. He needs local support, or at least acquiescence." He reassembled the rifle with a decisive click. "But if this standoff continues, pressure will increase. People will be forced to choose sides." On the fourth morning, Nora woke to find Stone already prepared for departure pack, assembled by the door. "Where are we going?" she asked, reaching for her boots. Need to contact Marshal Jenkins. Telegraph office in town too risky. Reynolds likely has it watched. Stone handed her a cup of coffee. There's a relay station 30 miles north. Jenkins was headed there last I heard. 30 miles, Nora repeated, calculating the journey on foot. 2 days' travel, hard going. Stone studied her face. You don't have to come. Cabin's secure. Enough supplies for a week. Nora considered the offer. 2 days' mountain travel in December wouldn't be pleasant. Yet the alternative, waiting alone, wondering if Stone would return, seemed worse. I'm coming, she decided. 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. Stone didn't argue, merely nodded and helped her prepare a smaller pack. By sunrise, they were moving through the forest following game trails that only Stone could discern. The day was clear, but bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds with each exhalation. They traveled in silence, Stone setting a pace that challenged Nora's endurance without breaking it. When they paused for brief rests, he taught her to read the landscape, which slopes would avalanche if disturbed where springs lay beneath snow, how to identify safe crossing points on frozen streams. By midday, they'd covered perhaps 10 miles, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. Stone led them through a narrow pass, then down into a sheltered valley Nora hadn't glimpsed from the homestead. Less traveled route, he explained during a brief halt. Adds distance, but reduces risk of encounter. As they rested, Nora studied Stone's face, noting the tension in his jaw, the vigilant scanning of their surroundings. This man was in his element, the hunter, the tracker, the survivor. So different from the careful craftsman who shaped wood into beauty at his cabin. What is it? Stone asked, catching her gaze. Just wondering which is the real Stone McRae, she answered honestly, the woodworker or the warrior. Something like surprise flickered across his features. Then, unexpectedly, a ghost of a smile. Been asking myself that for 15 years. They resumed their journey, the terrain growing more challenging as they climbed higher. Stone helped Nora across difficult passages, his hand strong and steady on her arm, but otherwise maintained professional distance. Always the gentleman despite their isolation. As dusk approached, Stone led them to a rock overhang, creating a natural shelter. Camp here, he decided, assessing the position. Defensible, hidden from view below. They established a small camp with practiced efficiency, Stone gathering firewood while Nora arranged their sleeping area, working together without need for discussion. A companionable rhythm had developed between them in their days at the trapper's cabin. A partnership of necessity evolving into something more comfortable. After a simple meal of dried meat and hardtack, they sat beside the small fire sheltered from the wind. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Nora found herself struck by their beauty, so much more vivid than in Boston's smoke-hazed skies. Reminds me why I stayed, Stone said quietly, following her gaze upward. After the war, nights like this make a man feel small in the right way. Small, part of something larger, more important than human concerns. He stared into the fire. After seeing what men do to each other in war, needed that perspective. Nora sensed a rare opening, a willingness to share that Stone seldom displayed. What happened to you in the war, Stone? He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if recalling scenes from another life. Began as infantry. Battle of Bull Run. After that, officers noticed I could shoot. His hand moved unconsciously to touch his Spencer rifle resting nearby. Transferred to Berdan's sharpshooters. Specialized unit. Green uniforms for concealment. Best marksman in the army. You were good at it, Nora prompted gently. Too good. Stone's face hardened in the firelight. They'd send us ahead of the line, find positions, trees, buildings, ridgelines, wait for officers, Confederate officers mostly. He paused, called it eliminating command structure. Truth was, we were assassins. Nora remained silent, sensing Stone needed to continue without interruption. Killed 37 men that way, some at 800 yards. Men who never saw it coming, never had a chance. His voice grew quieter. Kept a tally in my journal. Descriptions, ranks, how they fell. A haunted look entered his eyes. Some still visit me at night. It was war, Nora said softly. You followed orders. That's what I told myself. Stone met her gaze directly. Truth is, I was good at it. Took pride in my skill. Became someone I didn't recognize. He looked away. When it ended, couldn't go back to being who I was before. Came west, instead. Started over. The vulnerability in his confession touched Nora deeply. This hardened frontierman sharing his darkest memories, trusting her with his shame. We all have pasts we're running from, she said after a moment. Mistakes we wish unmade. Stone glanced at her sharply. What are you running from, Nora Hart? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Fair exchange, she supposed, after his own honesty. Edmund Vale, she admitted. My former fiancé. When the doctors determined I was unlikely to bear children, he broke our engagement. His family owned the building where my father's bakery operated. After father died, they called in the loans. Stone listened intently, his expression darkening as she continued. I sold everything to make payments, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, Edmund offered me a position in his household, not as wife, but... She couldn't finish the sentence. Mistress, Stone supplied, voice hard. Nora nodded. When I refused and tried to leave Boston, he threatened legal action. Claimed I was fleeing legitimate debts. Said he'd have me arrested. She met Stone's gaze. So I left in the night with what I could carry. Your advertisement seemed like providence. Stone's eyes had taken on the cold focus she'd witnessed during the confrontation with Reynolds's men, the calculating gaze of a predator. This Edmund Vale, he said carefully. What sort of man is he? Wealthy, connected, used to getting what he wants. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. But that's behind me now. 3,000 miles behind. Stone nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Before he could respond further, a sound drew his attention, faint but unmistakable. A branch snapping perhaps a quarter-mile distant. In an instant, Stone's demeanor changed. He doused the fire with snow, gathered their essentials with practiced speed. Move, he whispered, guiding Nora deeper into the rock shelter. Someone's coming. Heart pounding, Nora pressed against the cold stone as Stone positioned himself at the shelter's edge, rifle ready. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by their controlled breathing and the occasional whisper of wind. Then voices, distant but approaching. Men speaking in low tones moving through the forest below their position. Tracks lead this way. 2 people, one larger than... Waste of time. McRae's smarter than... Jack wants him found. Before... Stone remained motionless, listening intently as the voices grew closer. Nora could make out at least 3 distinct speakers, possibly more. Reynolds's men following their trail. When they were perhaps 50 yards below, Stone made a decision. He touched Nora's arm, pointed upward to indicate they would climb higher away from the approaching search party. She nodded understanding, gathering her pack with trembling hands. As quietly as possible, they retreated deeper into the rocks, finding a narrow crevice that led upward to higher ground. Stone went first, helping Nora navigate the difficult terrain in darkness. Every dislodged pebble sounded thunderous to her ears. They emerged on a wind-swept ridge exposed momentarily before Stone led them into a stand of pines. Below, torchlight flickered as the search party reached their abandoned campsite. "They'll follow," Stone whispered. "Need to move faster. Rougher ground ahead." For the next 3 hours, they pushed through increasingly difficult terrain, climbing rock faces, fording icy streams, traversing slopes that threatened to give way beneath their feet. Stone set a punishing pace, driven by necessity rather than choice. Nora followed without complaint, though her muscles screamed protest, and her hands grew raw from scrambling over rocks. This was survival pure and simple. Every step carried them further from pursuit, closer to potential safety. Near midnight, they reached a position Stone deemed secure, a hollow beneath fallen timber on a steep slope, invisible from below. "Rest," he instructed, voice barely audible. "Few hours only. Move again before dawn." Exhausted beyond measure, Nora huddled against Stone for warmth, both of them wrapped in the single blanket they'd carried. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive, her mind racing with images of men hunting them through darkness. "Will we reach the relay station tomorrow?" she whispered. Stone's voice rumbled in his chest against her ear. "Unlikely now. Need to circle wide, avoid main routes. Reynolds has more men than expected." "How did they find our trail?" "Professional trackers, likely Pawnee scouts from Wyoming." There was grim respect in his tone. "Good ones." A new fear took root in Nora's mind. "Stone, if they're tracking us this effectively, they'll find the trapper's cabin eventually," he confirmed her unspoken concern. "Question is, when, not if." The implications settled heavily between them. Their secure fallback position wasn't secure after all. Their supplies, their shelter, all potentially compromised. "We need a new strategy," Nora concluded. Stone was silent for a moment, thinking. "Marshal Jenkins is our best hope. Federal authority trumps territorial disputes. But reaching him now? What about Tom Pike? Could he get word to the marshal? Possibly, but risky for him, for Reynolds would suspect." Stone shifted slightly, adjusting their position. "Pike's already marked for supporting us. Don't want to endanger him further." As Nora pondered their limited options, a distant howl pierced the night. Wolf or coyote, she couldn't tell which. Stone tensed beside her. "What is it?" she whispered. "Not animal," he replied grimly. "Signal. They're coordinating the search." Another howl answered the first, from a different direction. Then a third, closer than either. "They're surrounding us," Nora realized with growing dread. Stone's arm tightened around her. "Not yet. But they're establishing a perimeter. By morning, they'll have men positioned on all likely routes northward." "What do we do?" His silence told her he was considering options, none of them good. "Finally, change direction. Head east instead of north. Cross the ridge at Blackwater Pass. Difficult terrain, especially in winter, but they won't expect it. And then, circle back toward town. Contact Pike if possible. Otherwise," Stone's voice hardened, "make our stand at the homestead. My ground, my terms." Nora absorbed this understanding what Stone was proposing. Not flight, but fight. Drawing their pursuers into a confrontation on terms more favorable to Stone. "Rest while you can," he advised, his breath warm against her hair. "Dawn comes early." Despite the danger surrounding them, Nora found herself drawing comfort from Stone's solid presence. In the few days they'd known each other, he'd become her anchor in a world turned suddenly treacherous. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Nora's last thought was that Edmund Vale, for all his wealth and connections, had never made her feel as secure as this battle-scarred frontiersman with death on their trail. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Stone woke her with a gentle shake. No words were needed. They gathered their meager supplies and prepared to move. Nora's muscles protested after the previous day's exertions, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate task. Stone studied the surrounding terrain, plotting their route. The ridge he'd mentioned, Blackwater Pass, loomed to the east, its upper reaches lost in low clouds. Even to Nora's untrained eye, it looked formidable. "Stay close," Stone instructed. "Step exactly where I step. Avalanche conditions." They set off, moving silently through the pre-dawn forest. Fresh snow had fallen during their brief rest, covering their previous tracks, but making the going more treacherous. Stone set a careful pace, balancing speed against safety. As light grew stronger, Nora could better assess their situation. They were traveling along a narrow game trail forest to their right, a steep drop-off to their left. Below, the valley spread out white and seemingly peaceful in the morning light. Stone stopped suddenly, dropping to one knee. Nora followed his example, scanning for whatever had alerted him. "There," he whispered, pointing. Far below, perhaps a mile-distant movement caught her eye. Dark figures against snow moving in a coordinated pattern. She counted at least 8 men spread in a search line, working their way methodically up the slope. "They found our trail," Stone confirmed. "Good trackers, better than I gave them credit for. How long before they reach us? 2 hours, maybe less." Stone studied the terrain ahead. "Need to move faster. Less caution, more speed now." They abandoned the game trail, climbing directly up the increasingly steep slope. Stone helped Nora over difficult sections, his strength making the difference between progress and failure. The physical demands were enormous. Loose rock beneath snow, treacherous footing thinning air as they climbed higher. By mid-morning, they'd reached the lower edge of Blackwater Pass, a narrow defile between towering rock faces. Snow had drifted deeply here, making each step a labor. Behind them, their pursuers had gained ground now visible without needing to search. "They're gaining," Nora observed, fighting to control her breathing. Stone nodded grimly. "Pass narrows ahead. Choke point. Good place for—" A sharp crack interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. Snow exploded near their feet as the bullet struck. "Down," Stone commanded, pulling Nora behind a rock outcropping. Another shot followed closer. "Long-range marksman," Stone assessed, peering carefully around their cover. "Good one." There was professional respect in his tone. "What do we do?" Nora pressed against the cold rock, heart hammering. Stone's eyes took on that distant focus she'd come to recognize. The sharpshooter calculating trajectories, distances, options. "Can't go back. Can't stay here." He studied the pass ahead. "Need to reach those rocks. 300 yards. Exposed ground." Nora understood the implications. 300 yards of open terrain under fire from a skilled marksman. Nearly impossible odds. Stone removed his heavy coat, then his flannel shirt beneath, leaving only his undershirt despite the bitter cold. "Put this on," he instructed, handing Nora the flannel. "Over your coat." "What? Why?" "Distraction." His face was grim with purpose. "I'll draw his fire. When he focuses on me, you run for those rocks. Don't stop. Don't look back." Realization dawned. "You're using yourself as bait." Best shot in Berdan's sharpshooters against whoever they've brought. Stone checked his rifle. Like my odds. And if you're wrong, his eyes met hers surprisingly gentle amid their harshness. Then you keep going, east over the pass. Town's 2 days' journey. Tell Jenkins everything. I'm not leaving you, Nora protested. Not asking. Stone's voice brooked no argument. Need someone to carry the message. Need someone to make this matter. His hand briefly covered hers. Put on the shirt. Be ready to run on my signal. With reluctant hands, Nora donned Stone's flannel still warm from his body. The garment engulfed her distinctive in its red and black pattern, exactly what Stone intended. From a distance, a marksman might mistake her for Stone himself. Ready? Stone asked, positioning himself to spring from cover. Nora nodded, throat too tight for words. Go straight for those rocks. Don't zigzag. Makes you predictable. Just run. With that, Stone rolled from their hiding place, coming up in a shooting position 20 yards distant. His rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. Rapid shots toward the unseen marksman. Now! He shouted. Nora ran legs, pumping lungs burning in the cold air. The distance seemed impossible. 300 yards of exposed, snow-covered ground. Behind her, Stone's rifle continued to fire, drawing answering shots from their pursuers. A bullet whined past her ear. Another kicked up snow at her feet. Nora didn't slow, didn't look back, focused entirely on the rocks ahead that promised temporary safety. 2/3 of the way across, disaster struck. Her foot plunged through snow into a hidden crevice. Pain lanced through her ankle as she fell forward. Scrambling, she pulled herself up, putting weight on the injured limb, and nearly collapsed again as agony shot up her leg. Keep moving, Stone's voice carried from behind. Gritting her teeth, Nora forced herself forward, half running, half limping toward the rocks. Each step sent waves of pain through her ankle, but fear provided stronger motivation than pain could overcome. The rocks loomed closer. 50 yards. 30. 20. Behind her, the shooting had intensified. Stone exchanging fire with multiple weapons now. The pursuing party had drawn closer. With a final desperate surge, Nora reached the shelter of the rocks, collapsing behind their protection. Her ankle throbbed mercilessly, but she was alive out of the marksman's line of sight. Now Stone needed to join her. She peered back across the open ground, searching for his figure among the scattered rocks where they'd started. A movement caught her eye. Stone breaking cover, running in a zigzag pattern toward her position. Rifle shots followed him, kicking up snow. He was halfway across when he suddenly staggered, went down on one knee, then pushed himself up to continue. "Stone!" Nora cried, watching him falter again. He reached the rocks beside her, collapsing against them, breathing heavily. Blood stained the snow where he'd knelt. "You're hit!" Nora gasped, reaching for him. Stone brushed her hands away. "Flesh wound, thigh, keep moving." He glanced at her awkward posture. "You're injured. Ankle, twisted or sprained." A grim smile touched his lips. "Fine pair we make." He assessed their situation with a quick glance. "They're closing in. Minutes, not hours now." Nora looked back at the open ground they'd crossed. Dark figures had emerged from the trees at the far side, approaching cautiously but steadily. "We can't outrun them now," she realized. Stone nodded, checking his ammunition. "Time for a different approach." He met her gaze directly. "Listen carefully. Chances are slim we both make it through this. If I create a diversion, you might escape eastward through the pass." "No." Nora's voice was firm despite her fear. "We stay together." "Nora, I didn't come 3,000 miles to abandon you now." Her hand found his squeezed firmly. Whatever comes, we face it together. Something shifted in Stone's expression. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once, accepting her decision. Then we make our stand here. He positioned himself at the edge of their rocky shelter, rifle ready. They'll approach cautiously. Expect 6, maybe 8 men. Nora checked her own weapon, the Smith & Wesson Stone had given her days ago. How many shots do you have left? 5 in the Spencer, 12 in the Colt. Stone's voice was matter-of-fact. You, 5 in the revolver. He nodded. Make them count. They settled into tense silence, watching their pursuers advance across the open ground. The men moved with practiced caution, using available cover spreading out to approach from multiple angles. Wait for my signal, Stone murmured. Let them get closer. The nearest man was perhaps 80 yards away when a new sound reached them. Hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the east. Both Stone and Nora turned toward this new development. Through the narrow defile of Blackwater Pass came riders, 6 men on horseback moving at speed. Leading them was a figure Stone recognized immediately. Jenkins, he breathed, disbelief evident in his voice. U.S. Marshal Daniel Jenkins and his deputies emerged from the pass, Winchester rifles ready. Seeing the standoff below, they spread out, taking positions on the high ground. McRae, Jenkins called down. Situation. Reynolds' men, Stone shouted back. Pursuing us since yesterday. Jenkins nodded, understanding, then turned his attention to the approaching group. This is U.S. Marshal Jenkins. His voice boomed across the mountainside. You men are interfering with federal witnesses under my protection. Drop your weapons and withdraw. The pursuers halted, clearly reassessing their situation. After a brief consultation, they began a measured retreat toward the trees. Jenkins and 2 deputies rode down to Stone and Nora's position, while the others maintained their advantage on higher ground. Stone, McRae. Jenkins dismounted, approaching them. Seems I found you just in time. How? Stone asked, still processing their unexpected rescue. Tom Pike, Jenkins explained. Rode through the night to reach me at Logan Station. Said Reynolds was making his move against you. He glanced at Nora. This must be Miss Hart. Ma'am? Nora nodded, too overwhelmed for words. Jenkins surveyed Stone's bloodied leg and Nora's obvious injury. You 2 need medical attention. Can you ride? Stone helped Nora to her feet, supporting her weight. We'll manage. As Jenkins's men assisted them onto horses, Nora caught Stone's eye. The relief in his expression matched her own, but something else lingered there. A recognition that their ordeal wasn't over. Reynolds's men had withdrawn, but the underlying conflict remained unresolved. Where to now? She asked quietly as they prepared to ride. Stone's gaze turned westward toward his distant homestead. Home, he said simply. Time to end this. As they rode back through Blackwater Pass, Nora pondered Stone's words. They were headed home, not to safety, but to confront whatever waited for them there. The battle had been postponed, not prevented. And yet something fundamental had changed. In facing death together on that mountainside, they had forged a bond stronger than their brief acquaintance should allow. Whatever awaited them at Stone's homestead, they would face it not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners by choice. The journey back to Elk Fork strained both riders and mounts. Stone's leg wound, though not life-threatening, bled steadily, staining his trousers dark, despite Jenkins's field dressing. Nora's ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, each hoofbeat sending waves of pain up her leg. Yet neither complained as they pushed westward through Blackwater Pass, Marshal Jenkins and his deputies forming a protective cordon around them. "Reynolds won't retreat far," Jenkins warned as they made camp that evening. "He's committed too much to back down easily." Stone nodded grimly, accepting a tin cup of coffee from one of the deputies. "Been building toward this for years. My homestead blocks his expansion plans." "It's more than just your land now," Jenkins replied, settling beside the fire. "Got reports Reynolds has been negotiating with Northern Pacific Railroad. They're planning a spur line through Wildwood Valley. Whoever controls access controls the profits." Nora glanced at Stone, understanding dawning. "So this isn't just about cattle rustling or personal vendetta." "Never was," Stone confirmed. "Reynolds wants the valley. I'm the obstacle." As the flames cast flickering shadows across the gathered faces, Jenkins elaborated on what he'd learned. Jack Reynolds had expanded his operation from Wyoming into Montana over the past 3 years. Initially, cattle and horse theft, then small-scale land grabs. Recently, he'd formed connections with railroad interests, positioning himself as the man who could secure right-of-way through contested territories. "Standard tactic," Jenkins explained. "Railroad doesn't want to get hands dirty with forcible removal. Hires intermediaries who handle the messy parts. Railroad maintains plausible deniability." Stone's expression hardened. "And Reynolds gets legitimacy. Protection." "Exactly." Jenkins stared into the fire. "Makes my job more complicated. Can't just arrest Reynolds without evidence connecting him directly to the violence. His men take the fall while he maintains respectability." "So what's the plan?" Nora asked, accepting a plate of beans and salt pork from a deputy. Jenkins and Stone exchanged glances. "Need solid evidence," the marshal said. "Written orders, financial transactions, something linking Reynolds directly to the attacks." "And where would we find that?" Nora pressed. "Reynolds maintains an office in Elk Fork," Stone replied. "Above the saloon. Keeps his legitimate business separate from his operations." Jenkins nodded. "If there's evidence, it's likely there. Problem is accessing it without alerting Reynolds or his men." Nora considered this challenge, drawing on experiences from her Boston life. "In my father's bakery, we sometimes needed to enter competitors' shops to check prices. I learned to become unremarkable, invisible." Both men stared at her with new interest. "You suggesting you could get into Reynolds's office?" Jenkins asked skeptically. "A woman alone attracts less suspicion than armed lawmen," Nora pointed out, "especially if she appears to have legitimate business." Stone's brow furrowed. "Too dangerous." "More dangerous than being hunted through the mountains," Nora countered. "Besides, who would suspect me? I'm new to the territory, unknown to most of Reynolds's men." Jenkins stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "She has a point, McRae. Reynolds knows you and my deputies by sight. Miss Hart might slip through where we couldn't." Stone's jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately reject the idea. "How would it work?" By the time the fire burned low, they had outlined a plan. They would reach Elk Fork the following afternoon. While Jenkins and his deputies established a visible presence in town, drawing Reynolds's attention, Nora would visit the saloon on a plausible pretext, then find her way to Reynolds's office. "I don't like it," Stone said later as they prepared for sleep. "Too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong." Nora adjusted her makeshift ankle wrap, wincing slightly. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Stone's silence was answer enough. Without evidence, Jenkins couldn't move against Reynolds directly. Without Jenkins's authority, Stone stood alone against Reynolds' growing force. "I can do this," Nora said with quiet determination. "I didn't survive Edmund Vale's machinations in Boston society to falter now." Something softened in Stone's weathered face. Not questioning your courage, just don't want you in danger because of my fight. It became my fight when Reynolds's men destroyed our home, Nora replied, the possessive pronoun slipping out naturally. When they forced us to flee, when they hunted us through the mountains. Stone studied her in the dying firelight, seeing not the Boston baker's daughter who'd stepped off the stagecoach days ago, but a woman transformed by adversity, stronger, more resolute eyes carrying a hardness they hadn't before. Get some rest, he said finally. Tomorrow comes early. Elk Fork appeared unchanged as they approached the following afternoon, its single street muddy from melting snow smoke rising from chimneys against the winter sky. Yet tension hung in the air, like the metallic taste before a thunderstorm. Townsfolk moved with purpose, eyes wary, conversations hushed. News of Reynolds's expanding presence had clearly reached them. Jenkins separated his force strategically, 2 deputies taking positions at the northern end of town, 2 at the southern, while Jenkins himself headed directly to the sheriff's office. Stone and Nora continued to Tom Pike's store, avoiding the curious stares of passers-by. "Thank God!" Martha Pike exclaimed, rushing forward as they entered the rear of the store. "Tom's been beside himself with worry." Tom Pike emerged from the stockroom, relief evident on his face. "Stone, Miss Hart, when Jenkins left, we weren't sure. Your warning reached us just in time." Stone acknowledged, clasping the storekeeper's hand. "Owe you for that." "Nonsense." Tom waved away the gratitude. "What's the situation?" While Stone explained their plan in low tones, Martha tended to Nora's injured ankle, clicking her tongue in dismay at the swelling. "Need to rest this properly," she admonished. "Wrap it tight. Stay off it for at least a week." "No time for that now," Nora replied, though she accepted the older woman's ministrations gratefully. "Is there a dress I might borrow? Something more presentable than these trousers." Martha assessed her thoughtfully. "For your part in the plan, yes, I think I have just the thing." An hour later, Nora stood before a small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Martha's blue calico dress, though slightly large in the waist, transformed her appearance from frontier survivor to respectable townswoman. Her hair, washed and arranged in a simple but neat style, completed the illusion. "Perfect," Martha declared, making a final adjustment to the collar. "Now remember what we discussed. Reynolds's men frequent the Silver Dollar, especially afternoons before the evening crowd. His office is above the saloon, reached by an outside staircase at the rear." Nora nodded, memorizing the details. "And the pretext for my visit. You're seeking employment as a baker. Heard the saloon might want fresh bread daily. Simple, plausible, and plays to your actual skills." When Nora returned to the store's main room, Stone's expression shifted subtly. Surprise, then something warmer before his professional mask returned. "Ready?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "As I'll ever be," Nora replied, adjusting the shawl Martha had provided. Stone reached into his pocket, withdrawing the small Smith & Wesson revolver. "Keep this hidden in your pocket. Last resort only." Nora accepted the weapon, tucking it into the dress's deep pocket. Its weight felt both reassuring and ominous against her thigh. "Jenkins and his men will create a diversion at precisely 3 o'clock, Stone continued. "Should draw attention from anyone watching the saloon. You'll have perhaps 15 minutes before they notice your presence." "And you?" Nora asked. "I'll be watching from the carpenter's shop across the street. Any sign of trouble?" He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Tom Pike cleared his throat. "Time to go. Folks are gathering at the north end of town. Jenkins must be starting his show." The street had indeed emptied as they emerged from the store's rear entrance, most townsfolk drawn to whatever spectacle Jenkins had arranged. Stone and Nora moved separately, keeping to shadows and alleyways until they reached the vicinity of the Silver Dollar Saloon. "Remember," Stone said quietly as they prepared to separate, "in and out. Don't take unnecessary risks." Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how much depended on her success. "If I'm not out in 20 minutes, I'll come for you," Stone promised, his hand briefly touching hers. "Be careful." With those words, he slipped away toward the carpenter's shop, leaving Nora alone with her mission. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood midway along Elk Fork's main street, a two-story clapboard building with peeling paint and unwashed windows. Even at midday, piano music and boisterous voices drifted from within. Nora approached the front entrance with deliberate confidence, her limp carefully controlled, despite the pain in her ankle. Inside the saloon was dimly lit and hazy with smoke. Perhaps a dozen men occupied tables playing cards or nursing drinks. A harried-looking barman polished glasses behind a scarred wooden bar, while a woman in a faded red dress half-heartedly played a battered piano in the corner. Conversations paused briefly as Nora entered, men turning to assess this unexpected female visitor. She ignored their stares, approaching the bar, with the practiced poise she'd learned navigating Boston society. "Excuse me," she addressed the barman. "I'm looking for work as a baker. I was told the establishment might be interested in fresh bread daily." The barman eyed her suspiciously. "Ain't hiring bakers. Got a cook already." "Perhaps I could speak with the manager," Nora persisted. "I have experience from my father's bakery in Boston. Specialty, breads, pastries." "Manager's not here," the barman replied curtly. "Try the hotel, down the street." A heavily mustached man at a nearby table chuckled. "Bart's just being cautious, ma'am. I'm Floyd Miller, assistant manager. Owner might be interested in your offer. His office is upstairs, but he's out at the moment." Nora turned toward this unexpected ally, noting his relatively clean appearance compared to the other patrons. "Perhaps I could leave a written proposal with samples of what I could provide." Miller considered this, then shrugged. "Don't see why not. Staircase outside around back. Offices at the top doors usually unlocked during business hours." "Thank you, Mr. Miller. You've been most helpful." Nora offered a polite smile before turning to leave. Outside, she glanced toward the carpenter's shop, where Stone waited, giving an imperceptible nod before making her way toward the rear of the saloon. The external staircase was exactly where Martha had described, wooden steps leading to a narrow landing with a single door. Checking to ensure no one observed her, Nora climbed the stairs as quietly as her injured ankle allowed. At the top, she hesitated briefly before trying the doorknob. To her surprise, it turned easily. Reynolds' office was smaller than expected, a single room containing a desk, filing cabinet, and several chairs. Papers were scattered across the desk alongside a half-empty whiskey bottle and dirty glass. The room smelled of tobacco, spirits, and male sweat. Closing the door behind her, Nora moved quickly to the desk, scanning the visible documents. Most appeared to be routine business records, liquor orders, payroll for the saloon, receipts for supplies. Nothing incriminating. She turned her attention to the filing cabinet, pulling open the top drawer. Inside, folders were labeled by month and year, orderly record-keeping at odds with the chaotic desk. Nora rifled through them, quickly aware that each passing minute increased her danger. The third drawer yielded what she sought, a folder labeled Northern Pacific, Confidential. Inside, correspondence between Jack Reynolds and railroad executives detailed arrangements too explicit to misinterpret. Reynolds would secure access through Wildwood Valley for a substantial fee, plus exclusive contracts for construction supplies. One letter specifically mentioned removing obstacles with Stone McRae's name underlined. Most damning was a receipt for payment to C. Reynolds for services rendered, elimination of Williams' problem. Old Jeb Williams, whose murder had triggered Stone's intervention against the rustlers. Hands shaking slightly with the significance of her discovery, Nora removed these documents and folded them into her pocket alongside the revolver. She was replacing the folder when a floorboard creaked behind her. "Well now, what have we here?" Nora whirled to find Jack Reynolds himself standing in the doorway, a tall man with cold eyes and an expensive suit at odds with his frontier surroundings. Behind him loomed two rough-looking men, hands resting on holstered pistols. "Mr. Reynolds," Nora managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I was just leaving a proposal for baking services." Reynolds smiled without warmth. "In my filing cabinet, creative approach." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You'd be McRae's woman, the mail-order bride everyone's talking about." Nora's hand slipped into her pocket fingers, closing around the revolver's grip. "I was just leaving." "I think not," Reynolds gestured to one of his men. "Check her pockets, Dugan. Seems our lady friend has been helping herself to my private correspondence." As Dugan approached, Nora weighed her options. The revolver contained 5 shots. 3 men stood between her and the door. Even if she managed to shoot her way out, the saloon below was filled with Reynolds' supporters. Her hesitation cost her the initiative. Dugan's hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her arm from her pocket. The revolver clattered to the floor. "Well, well," Reynolds said softly. "Armed robbery. That's a hanging offense in the territory." He picked up the fallen weapon, examining it. "McRae's I'd wager. Fine piece. Marshal Jenkins knows I'm here," Nora bluffed. "If I don't return—" "Oh, I'm counting on that," Reynolds interrupted. "The Marshal McRae, all rushing to your rescue. Walking right into a situation that will require unfortunate but necessary force." He smiled thinly. "Self-defense, of course. When McRae attacked my establishment to free a woman caught stealing private property." The cold calculation in his voice chilled Nora more than any threat of violence. This man had planned for contingencies, created legal justifications for whatever actions he took, just as Edmund Vale had done in Boston. "Take her downstairs," Reynolds instructed his men. "The storeroom. Make sure she's comfortable for now. We want her intact when McRae arrives." As the men grabbed her arms, Nora fought back, kicking, struggling despite her injured ankle. Her resistance earned her a sharp slap that left her ears ringing and blood trickling from her lip. "Careful," Reynolds admonished. "Damaged goods won't draw McRae as effectively." They dragged her down a different staircase, an internal one leading directly to the saloon's back rooms. The storeroom was small, windowless, smelling of stale beer and raw spirits. They pushed her inside the door, closing with a decisive click of a key in the lock. Alone in the dimly lit space, Nora assessed her situation with growing despair. The documents she'd found were gone, taken by Reynolds. Her weapon was lost. Her ankle throbbed mercilessly from the renewed abuse. Worst of all, she'd become exactly what she'd feared: bait to lure Stone into danger. Outside, she could hear the saloon's normal operations continuing: music, laughter, the clink of glasses. No one knew she was imprisoned just feet away. No one except Reynolds and his men. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Nora explored her prison, searching for anything useful. Shelves lined with liquor bottles, crates of supplies, barrels of beer. Nothing that offered escape or weaponry. A sudden commotion from the main saloon drew her attention. Raised voices, the crash of breaking glass. Nora pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear details through the thick wood. Federal jurisdiction, a voice that might have been Jenkins's. Private property, another voice responded. Then, unmistakably, Stone's voice low and dangerous. Where is she? Hope surged through Nora. They'd come for her just as promised. But Reynolds had anticipated this, had prepared his trap. She needed to warn them somehow. Desperately, she searched the storeroom again. A high, narrow ventilation slot near the ceiling might carry sound to the main room. Standing on a crate, ignoring the pain shooting through her ankle, Nora pressed her face to the opening. "Stone!" she shouted with all her strength. "It's a trap! Reynolds is—" The storeroom door burst open before she could finish. Dugan grabbed her, roughly dragging her from the crate. "Boss wants you front and center," he growled, propelling her toward the door. The scene in the main saloon froze as Dugan pushed Nora through the swinging doors. Marshal Jenkins stood near the entrance, flanked by 2 deputies. Stone stood slightly apart, his Spencer rifle held ready despite the odds against him. At least 10 men supported Reynolds, who stood behind the bar, with calculated casualness. "Miss Hart," Reynolds called genially, "so glad you could join us. I was just explaining to these gentlemen that you were caught stealing private documents from my office. A serious crime." "She was acting under my authority," Jenkins countered, "gathering evidence of your illegal activities." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Without a warrant, trespassing on private property. That seems legally questionable, Marshal." "The documents," Stone interrupted, his focus entirely on Nora. "Did you find them?" Before she could answer, Reynolds produced the folded papers from his coat. "These fascinating reading. Unfortunately, they prove nothing except that I have legitimate business arrangements with the railroad." He dropped the documents into a glass of whiskey, watching the ink run as the paper dissolved. "Oops!" Stone's grip tightened on his rifle. "Let her go, Reynolds. This is between you and me." "On the contrary," Reynolds replied smoothly, "this involves federal law now, thanks to Marshal Jenkins's interference. Fortunately, I'm a law-abiding businessman simply protecting my property from armed intruders." He gestured around the room where his men had strategically positioned themselves. "Witnesses will confirm that." The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Jenkins and his deputies were outnumbered nearly 3-1. Stone stood isolated, focused entirely on Nora's predicament. Reynolds held all the advantages: legal pretense, superior numbers, and a civilian hostage. "Here's what's going to happen," Reynolds continued. "Marshal Jenkins and his deputies will leave my establishment. They have no legal grounds to remain. McRae will surrender his weapons and face territorial justice for his numerous crimes, including sending this woman to steal my private correspondence." "And if we refuse?" Jenkins asked quietly. Reynolds shrugged. "Then I fear violence may occur. My men would be forced to defend themselves and their property. Miss Hart might be injured in the confusion. Tragic, but sometimes unavoidable." Nora felt Dugan's grip tighten on her arm, saw his other hand rest meaningfully on his holstered pistol. The threat was unmistakable. Stone's eyes met hers across the room, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, Nora understood what he intended. She gave an imperceptible nod, tensing her muscles in preparation. "All right, Reynolds," Stone said, lowering his rifle slightly. "You win. I'll surrender. Just let Nora go first." Reynolds smiled triumphantly. "A wise decision, McRae. Dugan released the lady to—" Stone's movement was a blur. The Spencer rifle swung upward, not toward Reynolds or his men, but toward the massive chandelier hanging above the central area of the saloon. His shot struck the chain supporting it with devastating accuracy. The chandelier crashed down with a tremendous noise, plunging the room into relative darkness and creating instant chaos. In the same moment, Nora drove her elbow into Dugan's stomach, breaking his grip as he doubled over. Gunfire erupted throughout the saloon. Nora dropped to the floor, crawling toward the bar where Stone had positioned himself. Bullets splintered wood around them as Reynolds' men fired blindly in the confusion. "Stay down," Stone ordered, reloading with practiced speed. His face was set in the cold mask of the professional soldier, calculating, deadly focused entirely on survival. Jenkins and his deputies had taken cover near the entrance, returning fire with disciplined accuracy. Two of Reynolds' men already lay motionless on the saloon floor. "Reynolds is escaping," Nora realized, glimpsing the saloon owner retreating toward the rear staircase. "Through the back." Stone's expression hardened. "Jenkins can handle things here. I'm going after Reynolds." "Not alone," Nora insisted, reaching for Dugan's dropped pistol nearby. Stone didn't waste time arguing. Together, they crawled toward the rear of the saloon, using overturned tables and the continuing gunfight as cover. Once through the swinging doors, they found themselves in a narrow hallway leading to the storeroom where Nora had been imprisoned. "Staircase at the end," Nora indicated, "leads directly to his office." They moved cautiously forward, Stone leading with his rifle ready. At the staircase, they paused, listening. Footsteps hurried above them, followed by the sound of drawers being opened and closed. "He's destroying evidence," Stone whispered, "or retrieving something important." "How do we approach?" "The staircase is exposed," Stone considered for a moment. "I'll go first. Cover me from here." Before Nora could protest, he was moving, taking the stairs two at a time, despite his injured leg staying close to the wall. She followed a few steps behind, pistol raised, watching for any threat. At the top of the stairs, Stone paused beside the closed office door, then kicked it open in a single powerful movement. Inside, Reynolds stood behind his desk, a derringer pointed directly at the doorway. Both men fired simultaneously. Stone grunted as Reynolds's bullet caught him in the shoulder, but his own shot was more accurate. Reynolds staggered backward, crimson blossoming across his expensive shirt. "It's over, Jack," Stone said, advancing into the room with rifle trained on the wounded man. "Drop the derringer." Reynolds' face contorted with hatred. "Nothing's over, McRae. You think killing me changes anything? The railroad still wants that valley. Someone else will finish what I started." "Maybe," Stone acknowledged, "but they'll face the same opposition. My land. My rules." Reynolds's laugh held no humor. "Your land. The territory belongs to men of vision of progress. Men like me. Not broken soldiers hiding in the mountains." His eyes shifted to Nora. "Ask your woman what she really wants. Civilization or wilderness. She knows the difference." "I know the difference between honest work and theft," Nora replied evenly, entering the room behind Stone. "Between building something and destroying it. Between men like Stone McRae and men like you." Reynolds's face twisted with rage. With unexpected speed, he lunged forward, derringer still clutched in his hand. Stone fired instinctively, the Spencer's report deafening in the confined space. Reynolds collapsed across his desk, the derringer falling from lifeless fingers. Papers scattered around him, some stained with spreading crimson. Silence fell, broken only by their heavy breathing and distant gunfire from the saloon below. Stone lowered his rifle, slowly wincing as he became aware of his shoulder wound. "You're hit," Nora observed, moving to examine the injury. "Not bad." Stone dismissed, though blood soaked his shirt. "What matters is what Reynolds was trying to protect." On the desk, partially covered by Reynolds's body, lay a leather portfolio. Stone pulled it free, opening it to reveal documents similar to those Reynolds had destroyed downstairs. But these were more explicit: detailed plans for forcing settlers from their lands, bribes paid to territorial officials, even a list of obstacles removed with names and dates. Old Jeb Williams's name appeared, as did several others Stone recognized. "This is what we needed," he said grimly. "Proof of everything: murder, extortion, conspiracy with the railroad." He kept copies, Nora realized. Insurance against his partners. Stone nodded. "Smart business, not smart enough." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and both turned defensively before recognizing Marshal Jenkins's voice calling out. "McRae, Miss Hart, all clear down here. We're okay," Stone responded. "Reynolds isn't." Jenkins entered, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. "Self-defense," he concluded without question. Man was wanted in 3 territories anyway. His gaze fell on the portfolio in Stone's hands. "What's that?" "Everything we need." Stone handed over the documents. "Names, dates, payments. All Reynolds's operations, including his railroad connections." Jenkins whistled softly as he flipped through the pages. "This is enough to bring down more than just Reynolds. Some powerful names in here." He closed the portfolio decisively. "Good work, both of you." As Jenkins left to secure the evidence, Stone sagged slightly against the desk, the adrenaline fading to reveal his exhaustion and pain. "Let's get that shoulder tended," Nora said gently, helping him to a chair. Stone submitted to her examination with unusual docility. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. "In the saloon. Here. Throughout everything." Nora paused in her ministrations, surprised by the open admiration in his voice. "I did what was necessary, as did you. Most women would have fled at the first gunshot, back in Boston by now. I'm not most women, Mr. McRae." She smiled slightly, echoing her words from days earlier. "No." Stone agreed, his weathered face softening. "You certainly are not." Outside, the gunfire had ceased completely. Voices called instructions as Jenkins's deputies secured the remaining members of Reynolds's gang. The immediate danger had passed, but Nora knew their ordeal wasn't fully over. Reynolds had been right about one thing. Others would come, drawn by the valley's resources and opportunities. The frontier's battles were never truly finished. "What happens now?" she asked, applying pressure to Stone's wound with a cloth torn from her borrowed dress. Stone's eyes held hers steadily. "We rebuild. The homestead. Our lives." He hesitated. "That is, if you still want that 3-month trial we discussed." Nora felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or something deeper. "I think we're well past the trial period, don't you, Mr. McRae?" For the first time since she'd met him, Stone McRae smiled fully, a transformation that lightened his entire face, erasing years of solitude and strain. "I believe we are, Miss Hart. I believe we are." As Jenkins returned to help them downstairs, Nora realized that in just 1 week, her life had changed completely. She'd left Boston running from one man's threats, only to find herself fighting alongside another against far greater dangers. Yet somehow, despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she had found her place. Not in civilized Boston drawing rooms, but in the wild mountains of Montana, beside a man as complex and resilient as the frontier itself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. 3 weeks after the shootout at the Silver Dollar Saloon, Elk Fork buzzed with unprecedented activity. U.S. Marshal Jenkins had established temporary headquarters in town, coordinating the dismantling of Reynolds's operation throughout the territory. Railroad executives from Northern Pacific arrived by special coach, eager to distance themselves from the scandal as Jenkins's investigation expanded to include their involvement in Reynolds's land-grabbing schemes. Stone and Nora observed these developments from the relative peace of Tom Pike's back room, where they had stayed while recovering from their injuries. Stone's shoulder wound had healed cleanly, thanks to Martha Pike's diligent nursing. Nora's ankle remained troublesome, but was improving steadily. "Railroad men looking nervous," Tom reported, returning from his morning rounds. "Jenkins has them cornered in the hotel. Something about renegotiating rights of way with legitimate landowners." Stone nodded satisfaction evident in his expression. "As they should. Territories belong to homesteaders, not corporations. And not outlaws," Nora added, carefully testing her weight on her healing ankle. The evidence discovered in Reynolds's office had proven more extensive than initially realized. The portfolio contained records dating back 5 years, detailing a systematic campaign to control land throughout the territory through intimidation, violence, and strategic alliances with powerful interests. Nearly 30 names appeared on Reynolds's list of removed obstacles, settlers who had been killed, driven off their land, or coerced into selling at fractions of fair value. More surprising were the connections to supposedly legitimate businesses and officials. 3 territorial judges had accepted bribes to rule in Reynolds's favor during property disputes. The territorial land office agent had falsified records to invalidate legitimate claims. Even Sheriff Donovan's name appeared, explaining his reluctance to pursue Reynolds's men after their attacks. "Jenkins says federal indictments coming next week," Tom continued, pouring coffee for his guests. "Governor's sending a special prosecutor from Helena. Biggest case in territorial history." "And the homestead?" Nora asked the question that had dominated her thoughts throughout their convalescence. Tom's expression brightened. "That's actually why I came to find you. Jenkins sent word. It's safe to return. His deputies cleared the last of Reynolds's men from the area yesterday. No sign of activity near your property." Stone straightened, a new energy animating his movements. "About time. Been away too long already." "But," Tom hesitated, "you should know. They didn't leave things in good condition. After you fled, Reynolds's men returned. Used the cabin as a base for a while." Stone's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Expected as much. Doesn't matter. We'll rebuild." "We." The word hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken questions about their future. Since the confrontation with Reynolds, circumstances had forced them together in crisis and recovery, leaving little time for discussions about what would come after. "If you're determined to go," Martha said, entering with a basket of supplies, "at least take these provisions, enough for a week while you assess the damage." The journey back to the homestead took longer than usual, their injuries necessitating a careful pace. Stone had borrowed a wagon and team from a grateful neighbor whose son had been among those named in Reynolds's records, rescued from false imprisonment through Jenkins's investigation. As they traveled, Stone pointed out landmarks Nora had missed during their hasty departure and subsequent mountain pursuit. Without immediate danger pressing upon them, she could appreciate the landscape's rugged beauty. Snow-capped peaks against clear blue skies, pine forests climbing steep slopes, the occasional deer or elk visible at the meadow's edge. "Spring comes late up here," Stone explained, "but when it arrives, valley blooms like nowhere else. Wildflowers carpet everything. Creek runs full with snowmelt." Nora found herself imagining these changes, picturing the dormant landscape, transformed by seasons she had yet to witness. For the first time since leaving Boston, she contemplated a future extending beyond immediate survival. A future in this place alongside this complex man who spoke of wildflowers with unexpected tenderness. The wagon rounded a familiar bend and the homestead came into view. Stone's cabin stood intact, but clearly showed signs of rough occupation. Broken windows, door hanging askew, debris scattered across the yard. The stable where Merlin had been killed had partially collapsed, its roof sagging dangerously. Stone halted the wagon, surveying the damage with an impassive expression that nonetheless failed to hide his grief at seeing his carefully built home desecrated. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly, understanding how deeply this violation wounded a man who had poured 15 years of his life into creating this sanctuary. Stone nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without words. After a moment's contemplation, he flicked the reins, guiding the wagon forward. "Could be worse," he said pragmatically. "Structures sound, framework intact. Rest is just details." They approached cautiously, Stone insisting on checking for traps before allowing Nora near the cabin. The interior confirmed Tom's warning: furniture, broken supplies scattered, or stolen, Stone's books torn and trampled. The stone fireplace remained undamaged, as did the heavy table Stone had crafted from a single tree. Someone had used the walls for target practice, bullet holes peppering the carefully fitted boards. Stone moved through the destruction, methodically assessing damage without comment. Nora followed, cataloging what could be salvaged, what must be replaced. Despite the desolation, she felt a curious sense of homecoming. This place, damaged as it was, represented something meaningful, something worth reclaiming. "We'll need to clear everything," Stone decided after completing his inspection. "Start fresh. New windows, new door. Furniture can be rebuilt." "The workshop?" Nora asked, remembering his tools and projects. "Untouched, surprisingly. Maybe they didn't find it, or didn't recognize its value." They worked until sunset, removing broken items, sweeping debris, covering broken windows with canvas until proper repairs could be made. As darkness fell, Stone built a fire in the fireplace, the hearth's warmth gradually reclaiming the space from winter's chill and intruders' disregard. Sitting before the fire on improvised seating, they shared a simple meal from Martha's provisions. Exhaustion pressed upon them, but beneath it lay satisfaction at having begun the process of reclamation. "Strange," Stone said quietly, breaking a long but comfortable silence. "Fought for this place for 15 years. Never felt like it truly mattered until now. Until watching it taken, then won back." Nora understood his meaning perfectly. Sometimes we don't value what we have until it's threatened. Stone's weathered face was contemplative in the firelight. "Been thinking about what happens next?" "Oh," Nora's heart quickened slightly. "Our arrangement," he continued carefully. 3-month trial you said yes to. Circumstances changed everything. Haven't given you proper chance to consider your decision." "I've had plenty of time to consider," Nora replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "More than most mail-order brides, I'd imagine. Most don't face gunfights and mountain pursuits their first week." A smile ghosted across Stone's features. "True enough. Accelerates the getting-to-know-you process." "Indeed it does." Nora set aside her plate, choosing her next words deliberately. "I've seen you at your best and worst, Stone McRae. Seen you fight, hunt, build, protect. Seen your nightmares and your kindnesses." She paused. "Question is, having seen me at my worst as well, do you still want this arrangement to continue?" Stone studied her with those gray eyes that missed nothing. "Never seen your worst, Nora Hart. Seen your courage, determination, loyalty. Seen a woman who stood her ground when most would have fled." His voice softened slightly. "Seen someone I'd be proud to call wife, if she'd still have me." The simple sincerity of his declaration touched Nora deeply. This wasn't romantic poetry or flowery courtship. It was something more valuable. Honest recognition of who she was. Appreciation for qualities she hadn't known she possessed, until circumstances demanded them. "I would," she said simply. "I do." Something shifted in Stone's expression. Tension releasing, perhaps, or uncertainty resolved. He reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. "Won't be easy," he warned. "Rebuilding takes time. Winter's not done with us yet." "Nothing worthwhile comes easily," Nora replied, thinking of all they had endured already. "Besides, I didn't travel 3,000 miles for an easy life. I came for an honest one." Stone nodded satisfaction, evident in the set of his shoulders. "Tomorrow, then, we start properly. Not just rebuilding the cabin, building a home." That night, they slept in improvised bedding near the fireplace, the cabin too damaged to provide proper shelter in separate rooms. Despite the discomfort, Nora found herself strangely content, the beginning of something genuine taking root within her. Not the manufactured affection of Boston society matches, but something forged through shared hardship and mutual respect. Spring arrived in Wildwood Valley exactly as Stone had described. A sudden transformation from winter's grip to explosive growth. Snowmelt fed streams that carved silvery paths down mountainsides. Pine trees brightened with new growth. Wildflowers emerged in waves of color across meadows. Blue lupines, red Indian paintbrush, yellow balsam root creating natural tapestries across the valley floor. The homestead underwent its own transformation. With Reynolds's threat, eliminated neighbors who had previously kept their distance came forward to help rebuild. Tom Pike organized work parties from Elk Fork, bringing supplies and willing hands. Stone's reputation as the man who had stood against Reynolds when others wouldn't earned him newfound respect throughout the territory. By late April, the cabin stood renewed, stronger than before, with improvements Stone had long considered but never implemented. An expanded kitchen area with proper shelving for Nora's baking equipment. A larger bedroom with a handcrafted bedstead Stone had worked on during evening hours. A covered porch wrapping around two sides, providing space to observe the valley's changing seasons. Most significant was the small second bedroom Stone added without explanation until the framework was complete. "For the future," he said simply when Nora questioned its purpose. Whatever that might bring. She understood his meaning. A space for children, whether their own or orphans needing homes, as Stone had mentioned in his earliest letter. The gesture acknowledged both possibility and uncertainty, leaving room for whatever life might deliver. On a clear May morning, Reverend Thomas from Elk Fork's small church traveled to the homestead, bringing half the town with him. The wedding ceremony took place on the newly built porch, with mountains standing witness and spring breezes carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Stone, uncomfortable in his best shirt, but standing proud, spoke vows that reflected his straightforward character. "I promise to protect, provide, and respect, to build with you, not over you, to face whatever comes with steady hands and clear eyes." Nora, wearing a simple dress Martha Pike had helped sew, responded with equal directness. "I promise to stand beside you in all seasons, to work toward what matters, to face challenges without retreating, to build a home worthy of the foundation you've laid." No mention of obedience or submission. These were vows between equals partners who had proven their commitment through actions rather than words. Marshal Jenkins attended, bringing news that federal prosecutions had begun against Reynolds's network of corrupt officials and business partners. Northern Pacific Railroad had renegotiated rights of way through the territory this time, dealing directly with legitimate landowners at fair market values. The territory's governor had appointed a new land commissioner committed to honoring homesteaders' claims. "Your stand changed things beyond just this valley," Jenkins told Stone during the celebration that followed the ceremony, "created ripples that reached all the way to Washington." Stone accepted this assessment with characteristic modesty. "Did what needed doing, nothing more." "Sometimes that's enough," Jenkins replied. "Right action at the right moment." As summer approached, Nora and Stone established new rhythms to their shared life. Stone continued hunting and trapping, but devoted more time to his woodworking, crafting furniture commissioned by townspeople who had discovered his skill during the rebuilding. Nora established a substantial garden, applying her baker's knowledge to growing and preserving food. Once weekly, she traveled to Elk Fork to deliver fresh bread to the hotel and general store, creating a small but steady income independent of Stone's endeavors. Their partnership developed naturally, each recognizing and respecting the other's strengths. Stone taught Nora wilderness skills, tracking, hunting, reading weather patterns. Nora introduced Stone to the books he'd collected, but rarely read reading aloud during evening hours beside the fire. Different backgrounds converging to create something neither could have achieved alone. In late July, as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains, Goldstone shared news gathered during his latest visit to town. "Jenkins intercepted a telegram," he said, whittling a piece of pine as he spoke. "Edmund Vale's making inquiries about your whereabouts." Nora stiffened slightly, the name from her past striking a discordant note in her present contentment. "What sort of inquiries? Seems he's still claiming you fled legitimate debts, trying to locate you through territorial records." Stone's knife continued its steady work, belying the tension in his voice. Jenkins advised him such pursuit might lead to uncomfortable questions about his own business practices. "Will that stop him?" Stone shrugged. "Men like Vale rarely abandon what they consider theirs. But Jenkins made clear you're under federal protection as a witness in ongoing prosecutions. Creates complications Vale might not want to navigate." Nora considered this information, surprised by her own lack of fear. 6 months ago, Edmund Vale had represented everything threatening in her life: financial ruin, social ostracism, personal degradation. Now he seemed diminished, a distant figure from a life that no longer defined her. "Let him come if he's so determined," she said finally. "He'll find a different woman than the one who fled Boston." Stone studied her with quiet appreciation. That he would. August brought an unexpected visitor, a young boy of perhaps 12 riding a too-large horse, arriving at their homestead near sunset. Stone intercepted him in the yard rifle, casually visible, but not threatening. "Help you, son?" he asked, noting the boy's exhausted state. "Looking for Stone McRae," the boy replied, voice cracking with adolescence and fatigue. "Was told he helps people when nobody else will." Stone exchanged glances with Nora, who had emerged from the cabin at the sound of an approaching horse. "You found him," Stone confirmed. "What's the trouble?" The boy straightened in his saddle. "Name's William Turner. Pa's homestead is 30 miles north near Carson Creek. Men came last week, said our claim was invalid. Gave Pa 2 days to clear out." His young face hardened with premature determination. "Pa sent Ma and my sisters to her cousins in Helena. Told me to find Stone McRae while he holds the property." Despite Reynolds's downfall, land disputes continued throughout the territory. Without the protective umbrella of his organization, smaller opportunists emerged, testing boundaries and preying on isolated homesteaders. "How many men?" Stone asked, already moving toward the stable where their horses waited. "4 that I saw. Armed." The boy's composure cracked slightly. "Pa's alone." Stone nodded, making quick calculations. "Rest here tonight. We'll leave at first light." "We?" Nora questioned, though she already knew the answer. Stone met her gaze evenly. "Turner's place is remote. Might need someone watching our backs. Someone who can shoot straight." Nora nodded, accepting the logic and the responsibility. In the months since their confrontation with Reynolds, she had continued practicing with both rifle and revolver, developing skill that surprised even Stone. This would be her first time applying that skill outside target practice. But the purpose, protecting another family's home, justified the risk. "I'll pack provisions," she said simply. They departed before sunrise, the boy leading Stone and Nora following with weapons and supplies. The journey took most of the day following game trails through increasingly rugged terrain. By late afternoon, they approached the Turner homestead, a modest cabin in a small clearing, smoke rising from its chimney. Stone called a halt, while still concealed within the tree line. "Something's not right," he observed, studying the seemingly peaceful scene. Too quiet, no movement. Using field glasses from his scouting days, Stone surveyed the property methodically. 4 horses behind the cabin. Men inside, looks like. Turner Sr.'s there too, but he frowned. Appears restrained. "Hostage situation," Nora concluded. Stone nodded grimly. "They're waiting for the boy to return, probably with reinforcements authorities or confirmation Turner's alone." Young William's face paled. "Pa, he's alive," Stone assured him. "That's what matters. Now we determine how to keep him that way." He turned to Nora. "Need to circle around, approach from different angles. Create confusion about our numbers." As darkness fell, they implemented Stone's plan. Nora positioned herself near the cabin's rear exit, rifle ready. Stone approached from the side, using outbuildings for cover. Young William remained safely hidden with the horses, despite his protests. Stone's strategy relied on surprise and psychological advantage rather than superior firepower, creating an impression of a larger force through coordinated movement and strategic noise. The confrontation unfolded rapidly once initiated. Stone's first shot, deliberately aimed at a lantern inside the cabin, plunged the interior into darkness and triggered immediate panic among the claim jumpers. "Properties surrounded by territorial authorities," Stone's voice boomed through the night. "Throw out your weapons and release Turner." Confusion reigned inside as the men argued among themselves. When one attempted to flee through the rear door, Nora's warning shot halted him effectively. "Next one's not a warning," she called, her voice steady, despite her pounding heart. The standoff lasted perhaps 15 minutes before the claim jumpers surrendered, emerging one by one, hands raised. Stone bound them efficiently, while Nora kept them covered. Inside, they found Turner Sr. tied to a chair, bruised but largely unharmed. His reunion with his son brought tears to the eyes of even Stone, though he turned away to hide his emotion. "How'd you know to come?" Turner asked after explanations and introductions. "Your boy's got courage," Stone replied. "Rode 30 miles alone to find help." "And found exactly the right person," Nora added, seeing the pride in young William's face at this acknowledgement. They remained overnight to ensure the claim jumpers' companions wouldn't return, then escorted the bound men to the nearest marshal's outpost the following day. Jenkins's investigation had established new protocols for land disputes, ensuring legitimate claims received proper protection. On the journey home, Stone rode silently for several miles before speaking. "Been thinking," he began, in the deliberate way that suggested important considerations. "Might be others like Turner, isolated, vulnerable. Territories changing, but old dangers remain." Nora understood immediately. "You're considering offering protection more formally?" Stone nodded. "Jenkins suggested it. Deputy Marshal Commission. authority to intervene in situations like Turner's, provide official backing for what I've been doing anyway. You'd be gone more often, Nora observed, considering the implications. Traveling the territory. Yes, unless... He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Unless you'd consider coming along, sometimes, when appropriate. The suggestion surprised Nora. Me as what? Partner Stone replied simply. You've proven yourself capable, steady under pressure, good with people in ways I'm not. His weathered face softened slightly. Besides, built this together now. Seems wrong to divide it. The proposition represented something Nora hadn't anticipated, not just a home and marriage, but a purpose extending beyond their immediate lives, a way to ensure others received the same chance they'd fought for. I'd need to improve my writing, she said after consideration, and we'd need someone to watch the homestead during longer absences. Stone's expression lightened at her implicit acceptance. Tom Pike's nephew's looking for work. Reliable young man, could manage things temporarily. And winter operations. Minimal travel during snow months. Focus on local matters, woodworking, preparing for spring. Stone glanced at her, something almost like eagerness in his typically stoic features. Could work, Nora. Could make a difference. As they crested the final ridge before their valley came into view, Nora considered how profoundly her life had changed in less than a year. From Boston baker's daughter to frontier wife to potential deputy. From running away to standing firm. From seeking safety to providing it for others. Yes, she decided, the rightness of it settling within her. It could work. We could make it work. Stone reached across the space between their horses, his hand briefly clasping hers, a gesture that spoke more eloquently than words. Partnership, purpose, shared vision. The homestead appeared below them, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. No longer just Stone's cabin, but their home. No longer merely shelter, but the center of something expanding beyond its walls. Influence, protection, legacy. Home, Stone said the single word, carrying layers of meaning. For now, Nora replied with a smile. And when we're done traveling again? As they descended toward the cabin, Nora reflected on the letter that had brought her west. Stone's stark advertisement seeking someone with courage rather than beauty, someone who could face wilderness and danger with clear eyes. She hadn't known then what answering would require or what it would ultimately provide. Hadn't known that what appeared to be desperate escape would become purposeful journey, that what seemed mere survival would transform into meaningful life. Stone dismounted at the cabin, then reached up to help Nora from her horse. Not because she needed assistance, but as gesture of connection. His hands strong and steady as always, his eyes holding the quiet appreciation that had replaced his earlier wariness. Never imagined this, he admitted, still holding her hands in his. When I wrote that advertisement, when you stepped off that stagecoach. Nor I, Nora agreed. But here we are. Here we are? Stone echoed, gazing at their rebuilt home, their expanding future. And here will remain whatever comes. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow, the promise of another winter to endure, another spring to anticipate. Inside the hearth, waited to be lit, the table Stone had crafted from a single tree stood ready for their evening meal. The shelves held books they would read aloud during long winter nights. Outside, mountains stood, sentinel valleys offered passage, and scattered throughout the territory, people like the Turners continued building lives that needed occasional protection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, homesteaders to assist, boundaries to defend, skills to develop. But tonight, this moment, They had reached a milestone worth acknowledging. Not an ending, but a meaningful waypoint in a journey continuing beyond visible horizon. "The Frontier's Keepers," Nora said softly, giving name to what they had become together. Stone nodded, understanding perfectly. "The Frontier's Keepers," he agreed. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." The end.